knowledge of good and evil. Unbalanced forces perish in the void, declares the secret work, and all is made known. The apple represents the knowledge of the procreative processes, by the awakening of which the material universe was established. The allegory of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is a cosmic myth, revealing the methods of universal and individual establishment. The literal story, accepted for so many centuries by an unthinking world, is preposterous, but the creative mystery of which it is the symbol is one of nature's profoundest verities. The Ophites, serpent worshippers, revered the Edenic snake because it was the cause of individual existence. Though humanity is still wandering in a world of good and evil, it will ultimately attain completion and eat of the fruit of the tree of life growing in the midst of the illusionary garden of worldly things. Thus the tree of life is also the appointed symbol of the mysteries, and by partaking of its fruit man attains immortality. The oak, the pine, the ash, the cypress, and the palm are the 5 trees of greatest symbolic importance. The Father God of the mysteries was often worshipped under the form of an oak, the Savior God frequently the world martyr in the form of a pine, the world axis and the divine nature in humanity in the form of an ash, the goddesses, or maternal principle, in the form of a cypress, and the positive pole of generation in the form of the inflorescence of the mate date palm. The pine cone is a phallic symbol of remote antiquity. The Thyrsus of Bacchus, a long wand or staff surmounted by a pine cone or cluster of grapes and entwined with ivy or grapevine leaves, sometimes ribbons, signifies that the wonders of nature may only be accomplished by the aid of solar virility, as symbolized by the cone or grapes. In the Phrygian mysteries, Ates, the ever-present sun savior, dies under the branches of the pine tree, an allusion to the solar globe at the winter solstice, and for this reason the pine tree was sacred to his cult. This tree was also sacred in the mysteries of Dionysus and Apollo. Among the ancient Egyptians and Jews the acacia, or tamarisk, was held in the highest religious esteem, and among modern Masons, branches of acacia, cypress, cedar, or evergreen are still regarded as most significant emblems. The shittim wood used by the children of Israel in the construction of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant was a species of acacia. In describing this sacred tree, Albert Pike has written, "The genuine acacia, also, is the thorny tamarisk, the same tree which grew around the body of Osiris. It was a sacred tree among the Arabs, who made of it the idol Alua, which Mohammed destroyed. It is abundant as a bush in the desert of Thursday, and of it the crown of thorns was composed, which was set on the forehead of Jesus of Nazareth. It is a fit type of immortality on account of its tenacity of life, for it has been known, when planted as a doorpost, to take root again and shoot out budding boughs above the threshold." See Morals and Dogma. It is quite possible that much of the veneration accorded the acacia is due to the peculiar attributes of the mimosa, or sensitive plant, with which it was often identified by the ancients. There is a Coptic legend to the effect that the sensitive plant was the first of all trees or shrubs to worship Christ. The rapid growth of the acacia and its beauty have also caused it to be regarded as emblematic of fecundity and generation. The symbolism of the acacia is susceptible of 4 distinct interpretations. 1. It is the emblem of the vernal equinox, the annual resurrection of the solar deity. 2. Under the form of the sensitive plant which shrinks from human touch, the acacia signifies purity and innocence, as one of the Greek meanings of its name implies. 3. It fittingly typifies human immortality and regeneration, and under the form of the evergreen represents that immortal part of man which survives the destruction of his visible nature. 4. It is the ancient and revered emblem of the mysteries, and candidates entering the tortuous passageways in which the ceremonials were given carried in their hands branches of these sacred plants or small clusters of sanctified flowers. Albert G. Mackey calls attention to the fact that each of the ancient mysteries had its own peculiar plant sacred to the gods or goddesses in whose honor the rituals were celebrated. These sacred plants were later adopted as the symbols of the various degrees in which they were used. Thus, in the mysteries of Adonis, lettuce was sacred; in the Brahmin and Egyptian rites, the lotus; among the Druids, the mistletoe; and among certain of the Greek mysteries, the myrtle. See Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. As the legend of Si Hiram Abiff is based upon the ancient Egyptian mystery ritual of the murder and resurrection of Osiris, it is natural that the sprig of Acacia should be preserved as symbolic of the resurrection of Si Hiram. The chest containing the body of Osiris was washed ashore near Byblos and lodged in the roots of a tamarisk, or acacia, which, growing into a mighty tree, enclosed within its trunk the body of the murdered god. This is undoubtedly the origin of the story that a sprig of acacia marks the grave of Si Hiram. The mystery of the evergreen marking the grave of the dead sun god is also perpetuated in the Christmas tree. The apricot and quince are familiar Ionic symbols, while the bunch of grapes and the fig are phallic. The pomegranate is the mystic fruit of the Eleusinian rites. By eating it, Proserpine bound herself to the realms of Pluto. The fruit here signifies the sensuous life which, once tasted, temporarily deprives man of immortality. Also, on account of its vast number of seeds, the pomegranate was often employed to represent natural fecundity. For the same reason, Jacob Bryant in his Ancient Mythology notes that the ancients recognized in this fruit an appropriate emblem of the Ark of the Deluge, the sunflower. From Kircher's Magnus of de Arte Magnetica Opus Tripartitum. The above diagram illustrates a curious experiment in plant magnetism reproduced with several other experiments in Athanasius Kircher's rare volume on magnetism. Several plants were sacred to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Hindus because of the peculiar effect which the sun exerted over them. As it is difficult for man to look upon the face of the sun without being blinded by the light, those plants which turned and deliberately faced the solar orb were considered typical of very highly advanced souls. Since the sun was regarded as the personification of the supreme deity, those forms of life over which it exercised marked influence were venerated as being sacred to divinity. The sunflower, because of its plainly perceptible affinity for the sun, was given high rank among sacred plants. P96, which contain the seeds of the new human race. Among the ancient mysteries, the pomegranate was also considered to be a divine symbol of such peculiar significance that its true explanation could not be divulged. It was termed by the Kabbarai the forbidden secret. Many Greek gods and goddesses are depicted holding the fruit or flower of the pomegranate in their hands, evidently to signify that they are givers of life and plenty. Pomegranate capitals were placed upon the pillars of Jachin and Boaz standing in front of King Solomon's temple, and by the order of Jehovah, pomegranate blossoms were embroidered upon the bottom of the high priest's ephod. Strong wine made from the juice of the grape was looked upon as symbolic of the false life and false light of the universe, for it was produced by a false process, artificial fermentation. The rational faculties are clouded by strong drink, and the animal nature, liberated from bondage, controls the individual facts which necessarily were of the greatest spiritual significance. As the lower nature is the eternal tempter seeking to lead man into excesses which inhibit the spiritual faculties, the grape and its product were used to symbolize the adversary. The juice of the grape was thought by the Egyptians to resemble human blood more closely than did any other substance. In fact, they believed that the grape secured its life from the blood of the dead who had been buried in the earth. According to Plutarch, the priests of the sun at Heliopolis never carry any wine into their temples, and if they made use of it at any time in their libations to the gods, it was not because they looked upon it as in its own nature acceptable to them, but they poured it upon their altars as the blood of those enemies who formerly had fought against them. For they look upon the vine to have first sprung out of the earth after it was fattened with the carcasses of those who fell in the wars against the gods. And this, say they, is the reason why drinking its juice in great quantities makes men mad and beside themselves, filling them as it were with the blood of their own ancestors. See Isis and Osiris. Among some cults the state of intoxication was viewed as a condition somewhat akin to ecstasy, for the individual was believed to be possessed by the universal spirit of life, whose chosen vehicle was the vine. In the mysteries, the grape was often used to symbolize lust and debauchery because of its demoralizing effect upon the emotional nature. The fact was recognized, however, that fermentation was the certain evidence of the presence of the solar fire, hence the grape was accepted as the proper symbol of the solar spirit, the giver of divine enthusiasm. In a somewhat similar manner, Christians have accepted wine as the emblem of the blood of Christ, partaking of it in Holy Communion. Christ, the exoteric emblem of the solar spirit, said, "I am the vine." He was therefore worshipped with the wine of ecstasy in the same manner as were his pagan prototypes Bacchus, Dionysus, Ares, and Adonis. The Mandragora officinarum, or Mandrake, is accredited with possessing the most remarkable magical powers. Its narcotic properties were recognized by the Greeks, who employed it to deaden pain during surgical operations, and it has been identified also with baras, the mystic herb used by the Jews for casting out demons. In the Jewish wars, Josephus describes the method of securing the baras, which he declares emits flashes of lightning and destroys all who seek to touch it, unless they proceed according to certain rules supposedly formulated by King Solomon himself. The occult properties of the mandrake, while little understood, have been responsible for the adoption of the plant as a talisman capable of increasing the value or quantity of anything with which it was associated. As a phallic charm, the mandrake was considered to be an infallible cure for sterility. It was one of the priapic symbols which the Knights Templars were accused of worshipping. The root of the plant closely resembles a human body and often bore the outlines of the human head, arms, or legs. This striking similarity between the body of man and the mandragora is one of the puzzles of natural science and is the real basis for the veneration in which this plant was held. In Isis Unveiled, Madame Blavatsky notes that the mandragora seems to occupy upon Earth the point where the vegetable and animal kingdoms meet, as the zoophytes and polypi do in Dicey. This thought opens a vast field of speculation concerning the nature of this animal plant. According to a popular superstition, the mandrake shrank from being touched and, crying out with a human voice, clung desperately to the soil in which it was embedded. Anyone who heard its cry while plucking it either immediately died or went mad. To circumvent this tragedy, it was customary to dig around the roots of the mandrake until the plant was thoroughly loosened and then to tie one end of a cord about the stalk and fasten the other end to a dog. The dog, obeying his master's call, thereupon dragged the root from the earth and became the victim of the mandragora curse. When once uprooted, the plant could be handled with immunity. During the Middle Ages, mandrake charms brought great prices and an art was evolved by which the resemblance between the mandragora root and the human body was considerably accentuated. Like most superstitions, the belief in the peculiar powers of the mandrake was founded upon an ancient secret doctrine concerning the true nature of the plant. It is slightly narcotic, says Eliphas Levi, and an aphrodisiacal virtue was ascribed to it by the ancients, who represented it as being sought by Thessalian sorcerers for the composition of philtres. Is this root the umbilical vestige of our terrestrial origin, as a certain magical mysticism has suggested? We dare not affirm it seriously, but it is true all the same that man issued from the slime of earth and his first appearance must have been in the form of a rough sketch. The analogies of nature compel us to admit the notion, at least as a possibility. The first men were, in this case, a family of gigantic, sensitive mandragores, animated by the sun, who rooted themselves up from the earth. See Transcendental Magic. The homely onion was revered by the Egyptians as a symbol of the universe because its rings and layers represented the concentric planes into which creation was divided according to the Hermetic mysteries. It was also regarded as possessing great medicinal virtue. Because of peculiar properties resulting from its pungency, the garlic plant was a powerful agent in transcendental magic. To this day no better medium has been found for the treatment of obsession. Vampirism and certain forms of insanity, especially those resulting from mediumship and the influences of elemental larvae, respond immediately to the use of garlic. In the Middle Ages, its presence in a house was believed to ward off all evil powers. Trifoliate plants, such as the shamrock, were employed by many religious cults to represent the principle of the Trinity. Saint Patrick is supposed to have used the shamrock to illustrate this doctrine of the triune divinity. The reason for the additional sanctity conferred by a fourth leaf is that the fourth principle of the Trinity is man, and the presence of this leaf therefore signifies the redemption of humanity. Wreaths were worn during initiation into the mysteries and the reading of the sacred books to signify that these processes were consecrated to the deities. On the symbolism of wreaths, Richard Payne Knight writes, instead of beads, wreaths of foliage, generally of laurel, olive, myrtle, ivy, or oak, appear upon coins, sometimes encircling the symbolical figures, and sometimes as chaplets upon their heads. All these were sacred to some peculiar personifications of the deity, and significant of some particular attributes, and, in general, all evergreens were Dionysiac planes, that is, symbols of the generative power, signifying perpetuity of youth and vigor, as the circles of beads and diadems signify perpetuity of existence. See symbolical language of ancient art and mythology. The Tree of Alchemy. From Museum Hermeticum Reformatum et Amplificatum. The alchemists were wont to symbolize their metals by means of a tree, to indicate that all seven were branches dependent upon the single trunk of solar life. As the seven spirits depend upon God and are branches of a tree of which he is the root, trunk, and the spiritual earth from which the root derives its nourishment, so the single trunk of divine life and power nourishes all the multitudinous forms of which the universe is composed. In Gloria Mundi, from which the above illustration is reproduced, there is contained an important thought concerning the plant-like growth of metals. All trees, herbs, stones, metals, and minerals grow and attain to perfection without being necessarily touched by any human hand, for the seed is raised up from the ground, puts forth flowers, and bears fruit, simply through the agency of natural influences. As it is with plants, so it is with metals. While they lie in the heart of the earth, in their natural ore, they grow and are developed, day by day, through the influence of the four elements. Their fire is the splendor of the sun and moon, the earth conceives in her womb the splendor of the sun, and by it the seeds of the metals are well and equally warmed, just like the grain in the fields. *******, for as each tree of the field has its own peculiar shape, appearance, and fruit, so each mountain bears its own particular ore, those stones and that earth being the soil in which the metals grow. See translation of 1893. Stones, metals, and gems. Each of the four primary elements as taught by the early philosophers has its analogue in the quaternary terrestrial constitution of man. The rocks and earth correspond to the bones and flesh, the water to the various fluids, the air to the gases, and the fire to the bodily heat. Since the bones are the framework that sustains the corporeal structure, they may be regarded as a fitting emblem of the spirit, that divine foundation which supports the composite fabric of mind, soul, and body. To the initiate, the skeleton of death holding in bony fingers the reaper's scythe denotes Saturn, Cronus, the father of the gods, carrying the sickle with which he mutilated Ouranos, his own sire. In the language of the mysteries, the spirits of men are the powdered bones of Saturn. The latter deity was always worshipped under the symbol of the base or footing, inasmuch as he was considered to be the substructure upholding creation. The myth of Saturn has its historical basis in the fragmentary records preserved by the early Greeks and Phoenicians concerning a king by that name who ruled over the ancient continent of Hyperborea. Polaris, Hyperborea, and Atlantis, because they lie buried beneath the continents and oceans of the modern world, have frequently been symbolized as rocks supporting upon their broad surfaces new lands, races, and empires. According to the Scandinavian mysteries, the stones and cliffs were formed from the bones of Ymir, the primordial giant of the seething clay, while to the Hellenic mystics the rocks were the bones of the Great Mother, Gaia. After the deluge sent by the gods to destroy mankind at the close of the Iron Age, only Deucalion and Pyrrha were left alive. Entering a ruined sanctuary to pray, they were directed by an oracle to depart from the temple and with heads veiled and garments unbound cast behind them the bones of their mother. Construing the cryptic message of the god to mean that the earth was the great mother of all creatures, Deucalion picked up loose rocks and, bidding Pyrrha do likewise, cast them behind him. From these rocks there sprang forth a new and stalwart race of human beings, the rocks thrown by Deucalion becoming men and those thrown by Pyrrha becoming women. In this allegory is epitomized the mystery of human evolution, for spirit, by ensouling matter, becomes that indwelling power which gradually but sequentially raises the mineral to the status of the plant to the plane of the animal to the dignity of man, and man to the estate of the gods. The solar system was organized by forces operating inward from the great ring of the Saturnian sphere, and since the beginnings of all things were under the control of Saturn, the most reasonable inference is that the first forms of worship were dedicated to him and his peculiar symbol, the stone. Thus the intrinsic nature of Saturn is synonymous with that spiritual rock which is the enduring foundation of the solar temple, and has its antitype or lower octave in that terrestrial rock, the planet Earth, which sustains upon its jagged surface the diversified genera of mundane life. Although its origin is uncertain, litholatry undoubtedly constitutes one of the earliest forms of religious expression. Throughout all the world, writes Godfrey Higgins, the first object of idolatry seems to have been a plain, unwrought stone, placed in the ground, as an emblem of the generative or procreative powers of nature. See the Celtic Druids. Remnants of stone worship are distributed over the greater part of the Earth's surface, a notable example being the menhirs at Carnac, in Brittany, where several thousand gigantic uncut stones are arranged in 11 orderly rows. Many of these monoliths stand over 20 feet out of the sand in which they are embedded, and it has been calculated that some of the larger ones weigh as much as 250,000 pounds. By some it is believed that certain of the menhirs mark the location of buried treasure, but the most plausible view is that which regards Carnac as a monument to the astronomical knowledge of antiquity. Scattered throughout the British Isles and Europe, these cairns, dolmens, menhirs, and kist vines stand as mute but eloquent testimonials to the existence and achievements of races now extinct. Of particular interest are the rocking or Logan Stones, which evince the mechanical skill of these early peoples. These relics consist of enormous boulders poised upon one or two small points in such a manner that the slightest pressure will sway them, but the greatest effort is not sufficient to overthrow them. These were called living stones by the Greeks and Latins, the most famous one being the Gigerian stone in the Strait of Gibraltar. Though so perfectly balanced that it could be moved with the stalk of a daffodil, this rock could not be upset by the combined weight of many men. There is a legend that Hercules raised a rocking stone over the graves of the two sons of Boreas whom he had killed in combat. This stone was so delicately poised that it swayed back and forth with the wind, but no application of force could overturn it. A number of Logan stones have been found in Britain, traces of one no longer standing having been discovered in Stonehenge. See the Celtic Druids. It is interesting to note that the green stones forming the inner ring of Stonehenge are believed to have been brought from Africa. In many cases the monoliths are without carving or inscription, for they undoubtedly antedate both the use of tools and the art of writing. In some instances the stones have been trued into columns or obelisks, as in the runic monuments and the Hindu lingams and Sakti stones. In other instances they are fashioned into rough likenesses of the human body, as in the Easter Island statues, or into the elaborately sculptured figures of the Central American Indians and the Khmers of Cambodia. The first rough stone images can hardly be considered as effigies of any particular deity but rather as the crude effort of primitive man to portray in the enduring qualities of stone the procreative attributes of abstract divinity. An instinctive recognition of the stability of deity has persisted through all the intervening ages between primitive man and modern civilization. Ample proof of the survival of litholatry in the Christian faith is furnished by allusions to the Rock of Refuge, the rock upon which the Church of Christ was to be founded, the cornerstone which the builders rejected, Jacob's stony pillow which he set up and anointed with oil, the sling stone of David, the rock Moriah upon which the altar of King Solomon's temple was erected, the white stone of Revelation, and the Rock of Ages. Stones were highly venerated by prehistoric peoples primarily because of their usefulness. Jagged bits of stone were probably man's first weapons, rocky cliffs and crags constituted his first fortifications, and from these vantage points he hurled loose boulders down upon marauders. In caverns or rude huts fashioned from slabs of rock the first humans protected themselves from the rigors of the elements. Stones were set up as markers and monuments to primitive achievement. They were also placed upon the graves of the dead, probably as a precautionary measure to prevent the depredations of wild beasts. During migrations, it was apparently customary for primitive peoples to carry about with them stones taken from their original habitat. As the homeland or birthplace of a race was considered sacred, these stones were emblematic of that universal regard shared by all nations for the place of their geniture. The discovery that fire could be produced by striking together two pieces of stone augmented man's reverence for stones, but ultimately the hitherto unsuspected world of wonders opened by the newly discovered element of fire caused pyrolatry to supplant stone worship. The dark, cold father stone gave birth out of itself to the bright, glowing sun fire, and the newly born flame, by displacing its parent, became the most impressive and mysterious of all religio-philosophic symbols, widespread and enduring through the ages. Saturn swallowing the stone substituted for Jupiter. From Catraris Imagini degli Dei degli Antichi. Saturn, having been warned by his parents that one of his own children would dethrone him, devoured each child at birth. At last Rhea, his wife, in order to save Jupiter, her sixth child substituted for him a rock enveloped in swaddling clothes which Saturn, ignorant of the deception practiced upon him, immediately swallowed. Jupiter was concealed on the island of Crete until he attained manhood, when he forced his father to disgorge the 5 children he had eaten. The stone swallowed by Saturn in lieu of his youngest son was placed by Jupiter at Delphi, where it was held in great veneration and was daily anointed. p98 The body of everything was likened to a rock, trued either into a cube or more ornately chiseled to form a pedestal, while the spirit of everything was likened to the elaborately carved figure surmounting it. Accordingly, altars were erected as a symbol of the lower world, and fires were kept burning upon them to represent that spiritual essence illuminating the body it surmounted. The square is actually one surface of a cube, its corresponding figure in plane geometry, and its proper philosophic symbol. Consequently, when considering the earth as an element and not as a body, the Greeks, Brahmins, and Egyptians always referred to its 4 corners, although they were fully aware that the planet itself was a sphere. Because their doctrines were the sure foundation of all knowledge and the first step in the attainment of conscious immortality, the mysteries were often represented as cubical or pyramidal stones. Conversely, these stones themselves became the emblem of that condition of self-achieved godhood. The unchangeability of the stone made it an appropriate emblem of God, the immovable and unchangeable source of existence, and also of the divine sciences, the eternal revelation of himself to mankind. As the personification of the rational intellect, which is the true foundation of human life, Mercury, or Hermes, was symbolized in a like manner. Square or cylindrical pillars, surmounted by a bearded head of Hermes and called Hermi, were set up in public places. Terminus, a form of Jupiter and god of boundaries and highways, from whose name is derived the modern word terminal, was also symbolized by an upright stone, sometimes ornamented with the head of the god, which was placed at the borders of provinces and the intersections of important roads. The philosopher's stone is really the philosophical stone, for philosophy is truly likened to a magic jewel whose touch transmutes base substances into priceless gems like itself. Wisdom is the alchemist's powder of projection which transforms many thousand times its own weight of gross ignorance into the precious substance of enlightenment. The tablets of the law. While upon the heights of Mount Sinai, Moses received from Jehovah 2 tablets bearing the characters of the Decalogue traced by the very finger of Israel's God. These tables were fashioned from the divine sapphire, Scathia, which the Most High, after removing from his own throne, had cast into the abyss to become the foundation and generator of the worlds. This sacred stone, formed of heavenly dew, was sundered by the breath of God, and upon the 2 parts were drawn in black fire the figures of the law. These precious inscriptions, aglow with celestial splendor, were delivered by the Lord on the Sabbath day into the hands of Moses, who was able to read the illumined letters from the reverse side because of the transparency of the great jewel. See the Secret Doctrine in Israel or the Zohar for details of this legend. The 10 Commandments are the 10 shining gems placed by the Holy One in the sapphire sea of being, and in the depths of matter the reflections of these jewels are seen as the laws governing the sublunary spheres. They are the sacred 10 by which the Supreme Deity has stamped his will upon the face of nature. This same decade was celebrated by the Pythagoreans under the form of the tetractys, that triangle of spermatic points which reveals to the initiated the whole working of the cosmic scheme, for 10 is the number of perfection, the key to creation, and the proper symbol of God, man, and the universe. Because of the idolatry of the Israelites, Moses deemed the people unworthy to receive the sapphire tables, hence he destroyed them, that the mysteries of Jehovah should not be violated. For the original set Moses substituted 2 tablets of rough stone into the surface of which he had cut 10 ancient letters. While the former tables partaking of the divinity of the tree of life blazed forth eternal verities, the latter partaking of the nature of the tree of good and evil revealed only temporal truths. Thus the ancient tradition of Israel returned again to heaven, leaving only its shadow with the children of the 12 tribes. One of the 2 tables of stone delivered by the lawgiver to his followers stood for the oral, the other for the written traditions upon which the rabbinical school was founded. Authorities differ widely as to the size and substance of the inferior tables. Some describe them as being so small that they could be held in the hollow of a man's hand, others declare that each table was 10 or 12 cubits in length and of enormous weight. A few even deny that the tables were of stone, maintaining that they were of a wood called cedar, which, according to the Mohammedans, grows profusely in paradise. The 2 tables signify respectively the superior and the inferior worlds, the paternal and the maternal formative principles. In their undivided state they represent the cosmic androgyne. The breaking of the tables signifies obscurely the separation of the superior and the inferior spheres, and also the division of the sexes. In the religious processionals of the Greeks and Egyptians an ark or ship was carried which contained stone tablets, cones, and vessels of various shapes emblematic of the procreative processes. The Ark of the Israelites, which was patterned after the sacred chests of the Isaac mysteries, contained 3 holy objects, each having an important phallic interpretation: the pot of manna, the rod that budded, and the tablets of the law, the first, second, and third principles of the creative triad. The manna, the blossoming staff, and the stone tables are also appropriate images respectively of the Kabbalah, the Mishnah, and the written law, the spirit, soul, and body of Judaism. When placed in King Solomon's everlasting house, the Ark of the Covenant contained only the tablets of the law. Does this indicate that even at that early date the secret tradition had been lost and the letter of the revelation alone remained? As representing the power that fabricated the lower, or demiurgic, sphere, the tablets of stone were sacred to Jehovah in contradistinction to the tablets of sapphire that signified the potency that established the higher, or celestial, sphere. Without doubt the Mosaic tablets have their prototype in the stone pillars or obelisks placed on either side of the entrance to pagan temples. These columns may pertain to that remote time when men worshipped the Creator through his zodiacal sign of Gemini, the symbol of which is still the phallic pillars of the celestial twins. The 10 Commandments, writes Hargrave Jennings, are inscribed in 2 groups of 5 each, in columnar form. The 5 to the right, looking from the altar, mean the law, the 5 to the left mean the prophets. The right stone is masculine, the left stone is feminine. They correspond to the 2 disjoined pillars of stone, or towers, in the front of every cathedral, and of every temple in the heathen times. See the Rosicrucians, their rites and mysteries. The same author states that the law is masculine because it was delivered direct from the deity, while the prophets, or gospels, were feminine because born through the nature of man. The right tablet of the law further signifies Jachin, the white pillar of light, the left tablet, Boaz, the shadowy pillar of darkness. These were the names of the 2 pillars cast from brass set up on the porch of King Solomon's temple. They were 18 cubits in height and beautifully ornamented with wreaths of chain work, nets, and pomegranates. On the top of each pillar was a large bowl, now erroneously called a ball or globe, one of the bowls probably containing fire and the other water. The celestial globe, originally the bowl of fire, surmounting the right-hand column, Jachin, symbolized the divine man; the terrestrial globe, the bowl of water, surmounting the left-hand column, Boaz, signified the earthly man. These 2 pillars respectively connote also the active and the passive expressions of divine energy, the sun and the moon, sulfur and salt, good and bad, light and darkness. Between them is the door leading into the house of God, and standing thus at the gates of sanctuary they are a reminder that Jehovah is both an androgynous and an anthropomorphic deity. As two parallel columns they denote the zodiacal signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which were formerly placed in the chamber of initiation to represent birth and death, the extremes of physical life. They accordingly signify the summer and the winter solstices, now known to Freemasons under the comparatively modern appellation of the two St. Johns. In the mysterious Sephirothic tree of the Jews, these two pillars symbolize mercy and severity. Standing before the gate of King Solomon's temple, these columns had the same symbolic import as the obelisks before the sanctuaries of Egypt. When interpreted Kabbalistically, the names of the two pillars mean in strength shall Moses receiving the tables of the law. From an old Bible. Moses Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher of the 12th century, in describing the tables of the law written by the finger of God, divides all productions into two general orders, products of nature and products of art. God works through nature and man through art, he asserts in his guide for the perplexed. Thus the word of the Lord is the hand, or active principle, by which the will of the Creator is traced upon the face of his creation. The Tanaim, or initiates of the Jewish mystery school, alone possessed a complete understanding of the significance of the 10 Commandments. These laws are esoterically related to the 10 degrees of contemplation constituting the path of ecstasy, which winds upward through he 4 worlds and ends in the effulgence of Ein Sof. p. 99 My house be established. In the splendor of mental and spiritual illumination, the high priest stood between the pillars as a mute witness to the perfect virtue of equilibrium, that hypothetical point equidistant from all extremes. He thus personified the divine nature of man in the midst of his compound constitution, the mysterious Pythagorean monad in the presence of the duad. On one side towered the stupendous column of the intellect, on the other, the brazen pillar of the flesh. Midway between these two stands the glorified wise man, but he cannot reach this high estate without first suffering upon the cross made by joining these pillars together. The early Jews occasionally represented the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, as the legs of Jehovah, thereby signifying to the modern philosopher that wisdom and love, in their most exalted sense, support the whole order of creation, both mundane and supermundane. Paragraph continues. The Holy Grail, like the sapphire Scythia, the lapis exilis, crown jewel of the archangel Lucifer, fell from heaven. Michael, archangel of the sun and the hidden God of Israel, at the head of the angelic host swooped down upon Lucifer and his legions of rebellious spirits. During the conflict, Michael with his flaming sword struck the flashing lapis exilis from the coronet of his adversary, and the green stone fell through all the celestial rings into the dark and immeasurable abyss. Out of Lucifer's radiant gem was fashioned the Sangreal, or Holy Grail, from which Christ is said to have drunk at the Last Supper. Though some controversy exists as to whether the Grail was a cup or a platter, it is generally depicted in art as a chalice of considerable size and unusual beauty. According to the legend, Joseph of Arimathea brought the Grail cup to the place of the crucifixion, and in it caught the blood pouring from the wounds of the dying Nazarene. Later Joseph, who had become custodian of the sacred relics the Sangreal and the spear of Longinus, carried them into a distant country. According to one version, his descendants finally placed these relics in Glastonbury Abbey in England, according to another, in a wonderful castle on Mount Salvat, Spain, built by angels in a single night. Under the name of Preston John, Parsifal, the last of the Grail kings, carried the holy cup with him into India, and it disappeared forever from the Western world. Subsequent search for the Sangreal was the motif for much of the knight-errantry of the Arthurian legends and the ceremonials of the Round Table. See the Morte d'Arthur. No adequate interpretation has ever been given to the Grail mysteries. Some believe the Knights of the Holy Grail to have been a powerful organization of Christian mystics perpetuating the ancient wisdom under the rituals and sacraments of the oracular cup. The quest for the Holy Grail is the eternal search for truth, and Albert G. Mackey sees in it a variation of the Masonic legend of the lost word so long sought by the brethren of the craft. There is also evidence to support the claim that the story of the Grail is an elaboration of an early pagan nature myth which has been preserved by reason of the subtle manner in which it was engrafted upon the cult of Christianity. From this particular viewpoint, the Holy Grail is undoubtedly a type of the ark or vessel in which the life of the world is preserved and therefore is significant of the body of the great Mother Nature. Its green color relates it to Venus and to the mystery of generation, also to the Islamic faith, whose sacred color is green and whose Sabbath is Friday, the day of Venus. The Holy Grail is a symbol both of the lower, or irrational, world and of the bodily nature of man, because both are receptacles for the living essences of the superior worlds. Such is the mystery of the redeeming blood which, descending into the condition of death, overcomes the last enemy by ensouling all substance with its own immortality. To the Christian, whose mystic faith especially emphasizes the love element, the Holy Grail typifies the heart in which continually swirls the living water of eternal life. Moreover, to the Christian, the search for the Holy Grail is the search for the real self which, when found, is the consummation of the magnum opus. The Holy Cup can be discovered only by those who have raised themselves above the limitations of sensuous existence. In his mystic poem, The Vision of Sir Launfal, James Russell Lowell discloses the true nature of the Holy Grail by showing that it is visible only to a certain state of spiritual consciousness. Only upon returning from the vain pursuit of haughty ambition did the aged and broken knight see in the transformed leper's cup the glowing chalice of his lifelong dream. Some writers trace a similarity between the Grail legend and the stories of the martyred sun gods whose blood, descending from heaven into the earth, was caught in the cup of matter and liberated therefrom by the initiatory rites. The Holy Grail may also be the seed pod so frequently employed in the ancient mysteries as an emblem of germination and resurrection, and if the cup-like shape of the Grail be derived from the flower, it signifies the regeneration and spiritualization of the generative forces in man. There are many accounts of stone images which, because of the substances entering into their composition and the ceremonials attendant upon their construction, were ensouled by the divinities whom they were created to resemble. To such images were ascribed various human faculties and powers, such as speech, thought, and even motion. While renegade priests doubtless resorted to trickery, an instance of which is related in a curious apocryphal fragment entitled Bel and the Dragon and supposedly deleted from the end of the Book of Daniel, many of the phenomena recorded in connection with sanctified statues and relics can hardly be explained unless the work of supernatural agencies be admitted. History records the existence of stones which, when struck, threw all who heard the sound into a state of ecstasy. There were also echoing images which whispered for hours after the room itself had become silent, and musical stones productive of the sweetest harmonies. In recognition of the sanctity which the Greeks and Latins ascribed to stones, they placed their hands upon certain consecrated pillars when taking an oath. In ancient times stones played a part in determining the fate of accused persons, for it was customary for juries to reach their verdicts by dropping pebbles into a bag. Divination by stones was often resorted to by the Greeks, and Helena is said to have foretold by lithomancy the destruction of Troy. Many popular superstitions about stones survive the so-called Dark Ages. Chief among these is the one concerning the famous black stone in the seat of the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey, which is declared to be the actual rock used by Jacob as a pillow. The black stone also appears several times in religious symbolism. It was called Heliogabalus, a word presumably derived from Elagabal, the Syrophoenician sun god. This stone was sacred to the sun and declared to possess great and diversified properties. The black stone in the Kaaba at Mecca is still revered throughout the Mohammedan world. It is said to have been white originally and of such brilliancy that it could be seen many days' journey from Mecca, but as ages passed it became blackened by the tears of pilgrims and the sins of the world. The magic of metals and gems, according to the teachings of the mysteries, the rays of the celestial bodies, striking the crystallizing influences of the lower world, become the various elements. Partaking of the astral virtues of their source, these elements neutralize certain unbalanced forms of celestial activity and, when properly combined, contribute much to the well-being of man. Little is known today concerning these magical properties, but the modern world may yet find it profitable to consider the findings of the early philosophers who determined these relationships by extensive experimentation. Out of such research arose the practice of identifying the metals with the bones of the various deities. For example, the Egyptians, according to Manetho, considered iron to be the bone of Mars and the lodestone the bone of Horus. By analogy, lead would be the physical skeleton of Saturn, copper of Venus, quicksilver of Mercury, gold of the Sun, silver of the Moon, and antimony of the Earth. It is possible that uranium examples of Hermes. From Christie's disquisitions upon the painted Greek vases. The primitive custom of worshipping the gods in the form of heaps of stones gave place to the practice of erecting phallic pillars, or cones, in their honor. These columns differed widely in size and appearance. Some were of gigantic proportions and were richly ornamented with inscriptions or likenesses of the gods and heroes, others like the votive offerings of the Babylonians were but a few inches high, without ornament, and merely bore a brief statement of the purpose for which they had been prepared or a hymn to the god of the temple in which they were placed. These small baked clay cones were identical in their symbolic meaning with the large Hermes set up by the roadside and in other public places. Later the upper end of the column was surmounted by a human head. Often two projections, or tenons, corresponding to shoulders were placed, one on either side, to support the wreaths of flowers adorning the columns. Offerings, usually of food, were placed near the Hermes. Occasionally these columns were used to uphold roofs and were numbered among the art objects ornamenting the villas of wealthy Romans. P100 will prove to be the metal of Uranus and radium to be the metal of Neptune. The four ages of the Greek mystics, the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, are metaphoric expressions referring to the four major periods in the life of all things. In the divisions of the day they signify dawn, midday, sunset, and midnight. In the duration of gods, men, and universes, they denote the periods of birth, growth, maturity, and decay. The Greek ages also bear a close correspondence to the four yugas of the Hindus, Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Their method of calculation is described by Ulamudian as follows: in each of the 12 signs there are 1,800 minutes, multiply this number by 12 you have 21,600, e.g. 1,800 x 12 equals 21600. Multiply this 21,600 by 80 and it will give 1,728,000, which is the duration of the first age, called Krita Yuga. If the same number be multiplied by 60, it will give 1,296,000, the years of the second age, Treta Yuga. The same number multiplied by 40 gives 864,000, the length of the third age, Dvapara Yuga. The same multiplied by 20 gives 432,000, the fourth age, Kali Yuga. It will be noted that these multipliers decrease in inverse ratio to the Pythagorean tetracties, 1, 2, 3, and 4. H. P. Blavatsky declares that Orpheus taught his followers how to affect a whole audience by means of a lodestone, and that Pythagoras paid particular attention to the color and nature of precious stones. She adds, the Buddhists assert that the sapphire produces peace of mind, equanimity, and chases all evil thoughts by establishing a healthy circulation in man. So does an electric battery, with its well-directed fluid, say our electricians. The sapphire, say the Buddhists, will open barred doors and dwellings, for the spirit of man. It produces a desire for prayer, and brings with it more peace than any other gem, but he who would wear it must lead a pure and holy life. See Isis Unveiled. Mythology abounds with accounts of magical rings and talismanic jewels. In the second book of his Republic, Plato describes a ring which, when the collet was turned inward, rendered its wearer invisible. With this Gyges, the shepherd, secured for himself the throne of Lydia. Josephus also describes magical rings designed by Moses and King Solomon, and Aristotle mentions one which brought love and honor to its possessor. In his chapter dealing with the subject, Henry Cornelius Agrippa not only mentions the same rings, but states, upon the authority of Philostratus Jarchus, that Apollonius of Tyana extended his life to over 20 years with the aid of 7 magical rings presented to him by an East Indian prince. Each of these 7 rings was set with a gem partaking of the nature of one of the 7 ruling planets of the week, and by daily changing the rings Apollonius protected himself against sickness and death by the intervention of the planetary influences. The philosopher also instructed his disciples in the virtues of these talismanic jewels, considering such information to be indispensable to the theurgist. Agrippa describes the preparation of magical rings as follows: when any star planet ascends fortunately, with the fortunate aspect or conjunction of the moon, we must take a stone and herb that is under that star, and make a ring of the metal that is suitable to the star, and in it fasten the stone, putting the herb or root under it, not omitting the inscriptions of images, names, and characters, as also the proper suffumigations. See 3 books of occult philosophy. The ring has long been regarded as the symbol of attainment, perfection, and immortality, the last because the circlet of precious metal had neither beginning nor end. In the mysteries, rings chased to resemble a serpent with its tail in its mouth were worn by the initiates as material evidence of the position reached by them in the order. Signet rings, engraved with certain secret emblems, were worn by the hierophants, and it was not uncommon for a messenger to prove that he was the official representative of a prince or other dignitary by bringing with his message either an impression from his master's ring or the signet itself. The wedding ring originally was intended to imply that in the nature of the one who wore it the state of equilibrium and completion had been attained. This plain band of gold therefore bore witness of the union of the higher self, God, with the lower self, nature, and the ceremony consummating this indissoluble blending of divinity and humanity in the one nature of the initiated mystic constituted the hermetic marriage of the mysteries. In describing the regalia of a magician, Eliphas Levi declares that on Sunday, the day of the sun, he should carry in his right hand a golden wand, set with a ruby or chrysolite. On Monday, the day of the moon, he should wear a collar of 3 strands consisting of pearls, crystals, and selenite. On Tuesday, the day of Mars, he should carry a wand of magnetized steel and a ring of the same metal set with an amethyst. On Wednesday, the day of Mercury, he should wear a necklace of pearls or glass beads containing mercury, and a ring set with an agate. On Thursday, the day of Jupiter, he should carry a wand of glass or resin and wear a ring set with an emerald or a sapphire. On Friday, the day of Venus, he should carry a wand of polished copper and wear a ring set with a turquoise and a crown or diadem decorated with lapis lazuli and beryl. And on Saturday, the day of Saturn, he should carry a wand ornamented with onyx stone and wear a ring set with onyx and a chain about the neck, formed of lead. See the magical ritual of the Sanctum Regnum. Paracelsus, Agrippa, Kircher, Lilly, and numerous other magicians and astrologers have tabulated the gems and stones corresponding to the various planets and zodiacal signs. The following list has been compiled from their writings. To the sun is assigned the carbuncle, ruby, garnet, especially the pyropan, other fiery stones, sometimes the diamond; to the moon, the pearl, selenite, and other forms of crystal; to Saturn, the onyx, jasper, topaz, and sometimes the lapis lazuli; to Jupiter, the sapphire, emerald, and marble; to Mars, the amethyst, hyacinth, lodestone, sometimes the diamond; to Venus, the turquoise, beryl, emerald, and sometimes the pearl, alabaster, coral, and carnelian; to Mercury, the chrysolite, agate, and variegated marble. To the zodiac the same authorities assign the following gems and stones: to Aries the sardonyx, bloodstone, amethyst, and diamond; to Taurus the carnelian, turquoise, hyacinth, sapphire, moss agate, and emerald; to Gemini the topaz, agate, chrysoprase, crystal, and aquamarine; to Cancer the topaz, chalcedony, black onyx, moonstone, pearl, cat's crystal, and sometimes the emerald; to Leo the jasper, sardonyx, beryl, ruby, chrysolite, amber, tourmaline, sometimes the diamond; to Virgo the emerald, camelian, jade, chrysolite, and sometimes the pink jasper and hyacinth; to Libra the beryl, sardius, coral, lapis lazuli, opal, and sometimes the diamond, to Scorpio the amethyst, beryl, sardonyx, aquamarine, carbuncle, lodestone, topaz, and malachite, to Sagittarius dihyacinth, topaz, chrysolite, emerald, carbuncle, and turquoise, to Capricorn the chrysoprase, ruby, malachite, black onyx, white onyx, jet, and moonstone, to Aquarius the crystal, sapphire, garnet, zircon, and opal, to Pisces the sapphire, jasper, chrysolite, moonstone, and amethyst. Both the magic mirror and the crystal ball are symbols little understood. Woe to that benighted mortal who accepts literally the stories circulated concerning them. He will discover, often at the cost of sanity and health, that sorcery and philosophy, while often confused, have nothing in common. The Persian magi carried mirrors as an emblem of the material sphere which reflects divinity from its every part. The crystal ball, long misused as a medium for the cultivation of psychical powers, is a threefold symbol. 1. It signifies the crystalline universal egg in whose transparent depths creation exists. 2. It is a proper figure of deity previous to its immersion in matter. 3. It signifies the etheric sphere of the world in whose translucent essences is impressed and preserved the perfect image of all terrestrial activity. Meteors, or rocks from heaven, were considered tokens of divine favor and enshrined as evidence of a pact between the gods and the community in which they fell. Curiously marked or chipped natural stones are occasionally found. In China there is a slab of marble the grain of which forms a perfect likeness of the Chinese dragon. The Oberammergau stone, chipped by nature into a close resemblance to the popular conception of the face of Christ, is so remarkable that even the crowned heads of Europe requested the privilege of beholding it. Stones of such nature were held in the highest esteem among primitive peoples and even today exert a wide influence upon the religiously minded. The Pythagorean signet ring. From Carteries Imagini degli Dei degli Antichi. The number 5 was peculiarly associated by the Pythagoreans with the art of healing, and the pentagram, or five-pointed star, was to them the symbol of health. The above figure represents a magical ring set with a talismanic gem bearing the pent alpha, or star formed by 5 different positions of the Greek alpha. On this subject Mackey writes, the disciples of Pythagoras, who were indeed its real inventors, placed within each of its interior angles one of the letters of the Greek word upsilon gamma epsilon iota alpha, or the Latin one salus, both of which signify health, and thus it was made the talisman of health. They placed it at the beginning of their epistles as a greeting to invoke a secure health to their correspondent. But its use was not confined to the disciples of Pythagoras. As a talisman, it was employed all over the East as a charm to resist evil spirits. Ceremonial magic and sorcery. Ceremonial magic is the ancient art of invoking and controlling spirits by a scientific application of certain formulae. A magician, enveloped in sanctified vestments and carrying a wand inscribed with hieroglyphic figures, could by the power vested in certain words and symbols control the invisible inhabitants of the elements and of the astral world. While the elaborate ceremonial magic of antiquity was not necessarily evil, there arose from its perversion several false schools of sorcery, or black magic. Egypt, a great center of learning and the birthplace of many arts and sciences, furnished an ideal environment for transcendental experimentation. Here the black magicians of Atlantis continued to exercise their superhuman powers until they had completely undermined and corrupted the morals of the primitive mysteries. By establishing a sacerdotal caste they usurped the position formerly occupied by the initiates, and seized the reins of spiritual government. Thus black magic dictated the state religion and paralyzed the intellectual and spiritual activities of the individual by demanding his complete and unhesitating acquiescence in the dogma formulated by the priestcraft. The pharaoh became a puppet in the hands of the Scarlet Council, a committee of arch-sorcerers elevated to power by the priesthood. These sorcerers then began the systematic destruction of all keys to the ancient wisdom, so that none might have access to the knowledge necessary to reach adeptship without first becoming one of their order. They mutilated the rituals of the mysteries while professing to preserve them, so that even though the neophyte passed through the degrees he could not secure the knowledge to which he was entitled. Idolatry was introduced by encouraging the worship of the images which in the beginning the wise had erected solely as symbols for study and meditation. False interpretations were given to the emblems and figures of the mysteries, and elaborate theologies were created to confuse the minds of their devotees. The masses, deprived of their birthright of understanding and groveling in ignorance, eventually became the abject slaves of the spiritual impostors. Superstition universally prevailed and the black magicians completely dominated national affairs, with the result that humanity still suffers from the sophistries of the priestcrafts of Atlantis and Egypt. Fully convinced that their scriptures sanctioned it, numerous medieval Kabbalists devoted their lives to the practice of ceremonial magic. The transcendentalism of the Kabbalists is founded upon the ancient and magical formula of King Solomon, who has long been considered by the Jews as the prince of ceremonial magicians. Among the Kabbalists of the Middle Ages were a great number of black magicians who strayed from the noble concepts of the Sefer Yetzirah and became enmeshed in demonism and witchcraft. They sought to substitute magic mirrors, consecrated daggers, and circles spread around posts of coffin nails, for the living of that virtuous life which, without the assistance of complicated rituals or submundane creatures, unfailingly brings man to the state of true individual completion. Those who sought to control elemental spirits through ceremonial magic did so largely with the hope of securing from the invisible worlds either rare knowledge or supernatural power. The Little Red Demon of Napoleon Bonaparte and the infamous oracular heads of de' Medici are examples of the disastrous results of permitting elemental beings to dictate the course of human procedure. While the learned and godlike daemon of Socrates seems to have been an exception, this really proves that the intellectual and moral status of the magician has much to do with the type of elemental he is capable of invoking. But even the daemon of Socrates deserted the philosopher when the sentence of death was passed. Transcendentalism and all forms of phenomenalistic magic are but blind alleys, outgrowths of Atlantean sorcery, and those who forsake the straight path of philosophy to wander therein almost invariably fall victims to their imprudence. Man, incapable of controlling his own appetites, is not equal to the task of governing the fiery and tempestuous elemental spirits. Many a magician has lost his life as the result of opening a way whereby submundane creatures could become active participants in his affairs. When Eliphas Levi invoked the spirit of Apollonius of Tyana, what did he hope to accomplish? Is the gratification of curiosity a motive sufficient to warrant the devotion of an entire lifetime to a dangerous and unprofitable pursuit? If the living Apollonius refused to divulge his secrets to the profane, is there any probability that after death he would disclose them to the curious-minded? Levi himself did not dare to assert that the spectre which appeared to him was actually the great philosopher, for Levi realized only too well the proclivity of elementals to impersonate those who have passed on. The majority of modern mediumistic apparitions are but elemental creatures masquerading through bodies composed of thought substance supplied by the very persons desiring to behold these wraiths of decarnate beings. The theory and practice of black magic. Some understanding of the intricate theory and practice of ceremonial magic may be derived from a brief consideration of its underlying premises. First, the visible universe has an invisible counterpart, the higher planes of which are peopled by good and beautiful spirits. The lower planes, dark and foreboding, are the habitation of evil spirits and demons under the leadership of the fallen angel and his 10 princes. Second, by means of the secret processes of ceremonial magic it is possible to contact these invisible creatures and gain their help in some human undertaking. Good spirits willingly lend their assistance to any worthy enterprise, but the evil spirits serve only those who live to pervert and destroy. Third, it is possible to make contracts with spirits whereby the magician becomes for a stipulated time the master of an elemental being. Fourth, true black magic is performed with the aid of a demoniacal spirit, who serves the sorcerer for the length of his earthly life, with the understanding that after death the magician shall become the servant of his own demon. For this reason a black magician will go to inconceivable ends to prolong his physical life, since there is nothing for him beyond the grave. The most dangerous form of black magic is the scientific perversion of occult power for the gratification of personal desire. Its less complex and more universal form is human selfishness, For selfishness is the fundamental cause of all worldly evil. A man will barter his eternal soul for temporal power, and down through the ages a mysterious process has been evolved which actually enables him to make this exchange. In its various branches, the black art includes nearly all forms of ceremonial magic, necromancy, witchcraft, sorcery, and vampirism. Under the same general heading are also included mesmerism and hypnotism, except when used solely for medical purposes, and even then there is an element of risk for all concerned. Though the demonism of the Middle Ages seems to have disappeared, there is abundant evidence that in many forms of modern thought, especially the so-called prosperity psychology, willpower-building metaphysics, and systems of high-pressure salesmanship, Baphomet, the goat of Mendes. From Levi's Transcendental Magic. The practice of magic, either white or black, depends upon the ability of the adept to control the universal life force, that which Eliphas Levi calls the great magical agent or the astral light. By the manipulation of this fluidic essence, the phenomena of transcendentalism are produced. The famous hermaphroditic goat of Mendes was a composite creature formulated to symbolize this astral light. It is identical with Baphomet, the mystic pantheos of those disciples of ceremonial magic, the Templars, who probably obtained it from the Arabians. P102 Black magic has merely passed through a metamorphosis, and although its name be changed, its nature remains the same. A well-known magician of the Middle Ages was Dr. Johannes Faustus, more commonly known as Dr. Faust. By a study of magical writings, he was enabled to bind to his service an elemental who served him for many years in various capacities. Strange legends are told concerning the magical powers possessed by Dr. Faust. Upon one occasion, the philosopher, being apparently in a playful mood, threw his mantle over a number of eggs in a marketwoman's basket, causing them to hatch instantly. At another time, having fallen overboard from a small boat, he was picked up and returned to the craft with his clothes still dry. But, like nearly all other magicians, Dr. Faust came at length to disaster. He was found one morning with a knife in his back, and it was commonly believed that his familiar spirit had murdered him. Although Goethe's Dr. Faust is generally regarded as merely a fictional character, this old magician actually lived during the 16th century. Dr. Faust wrote a book describing his experiences with spirits, a section of which is reprinted below. Dr. Faust must not be confused with Johann Faust, the printer. Extract from the Book of Dr. Faust, Wittenberg, 1524, an abridged translation from the original German of a book ordered destroyed. From my youth I followed art and science and was tireless in my reading of books. Among those which came to my hand was a volume containing all kinds of invocations and magical formulae. In this book I discovered information to the effect that a spirit, whether he be of the fire, the water, the earth, or the air, can be compelled to do the will of a magician capable of controlling him. I also discovered that according as one spirit has more power than another, each is adapted for a different operation and each is capable of producing certain supernatural effects. After reading this wonderful book, I made several experiments, desiring to test the accuracy of the statements made therein. At first I had little faith that what was promised would take place. But at the very first invocation which I attempted, a mighty spirit manifested to me, desiring to know why I had invoked him. His coming so amazed me that I scarcely knew what to say, but finally asked him if he would serve me in my magical investigations. He replied that if certain conditions were agreed upon he would. The conditions were that I should make a pact with him. This I did not desire to do, but as in my ignorance I had not protected myself with a circle and was actually at the mercy of the spirit, I did not dare to refuse his request and resigned myself to the inevitable, considering it wisest to turn my mantle according to the wind. I then told him that if he would be serviceable to me according to my desires and needs for a certain length of time, I would sign myself over to him. After the pact had been arranged, this mighty spirit, whose name was Astaroth, introduced me to another spirit by the name of Marbuel, who was appointed to be my servant. I questioned Marbuel as to his suitability for my needs. I asked him how quick he was, and he answered, as swift as the winds. This did not satisfy me, so I replied, you cannot become my servant. Go again whence you have come. Soon another spirit manifested itself, whose name was Unequal. Upon asking him the same question, he answered that he was swift as a bird in the air. I said, you are still too slow for me. Go whence you came. In the same moment another spirit by the name of Asiel manifested himself. For the third time I asked my question and he answered, I am as swift as human thought. You shall serve me, I replied. This spirit was faithful for a long time, but to tell you how he served me is not possible in a document of this length, and I will here only indicate how spirits are to be invoked and how the circles for protection are to be prepared. There are many kinds of spirits which will permit themselves to be invoked by man and become his servant. Of these I will list a few. Asiel, the mightiest among those who serve men. He manifests in pleasing human form about 3 feet high. He must be invoked 3 times before he will come forth into the circle prepared for him. He will furnish riches and will instantly fetch things from a great distance, according to the will of the magician. He is as swift as human thought. Unequal, serviceable and most useful, and comes in the form of a 10-year-old boy. He must be invoked 3 times. His special power is to discover treasures and minerals hidden in the ground, which he will furnish to the magician. Marbuel, a true lord of the mountains and swift as a bird on the wing. He is an opposing and troublesome spirit, hard to control. You must invoke him 4 times. He appears in the person of Mars, a warrior in heavy armor. He will furnish the magician those things which grow above and under the earth. He is particularly the lord of the spring root. The spring root is a mysterious herb, possibly of a reddish color, which medieval magicians asserted had the property of drawing forth or opening anything it touched. If placed against a locked door, it would open the door. The Hermetists believed that the red-capped woodpecker was specially endowed with the faculty of discovering spring root, so they followed this bird to its nest, and then stopped up the hole in the tree where its young were. The red-crested woodpecker went at once in quest of the spring root, and, discovering it, brought it to the tree. It immediately drew forth the stopper from the entrance to the nest. The magician then secured the root from the bird. It was also asserted that because of its structure, the etheric body of the spring root was utilized as a vehicle of expression by certain elemental spirits which manifested through the proclivity of drawing out or opening things. Asiel, a mighty ruler of the sea, controlling things both upon and under the water. He furnishes things lost or sunk in rivers, lakes, and oceans, such as sunken ships and treasures. The more sharply you invoke him, the swifter he is upon his errands. Machiel comes in the form of a beautiful maiden, and by her aid the magician is raised to honor and dignity. She makes those she serves worthy and noble, gracious and kindly, and assists in all matters of litigation and justice. She will not come unless invoked twice. Barul, the master of all arts. He manifests as a master workman and comes wearing an apron. He can teach a magician more in a moment than all the master workmen of the world combined could accomplish in 20 years. He must be invoked 3 times. These are the spirits most serviceable to man, but there are numerous others which, for lack of space, I am unable to describe. Now, if you desire the aid of the spirit to get this or that, then you must first draw the sign of the spirit whom you desire to invoke. The drawing must be made just in front of a circle made before sunrise, in which you and your assistants will stand. If you desire financial assistance, then you must invoke the spirit Asiel. Draw his sign in front of the circle. If you need other things, then draw the sign of the spirit capable of furnishing them. On the place where you intend to make the circle, you must first draw a great cross with a large sword with which no one ever has been hurt. Then you must make 3 concentric circles. The innermost circle is made of a magical sword. From Levi's The Magical Ritual. Eliphaz Levi describes the preparation of a magical sword in substance as follows: the steel blade should be forged in the hour of Mars, with new tools. The pommel should be of hollow silver containing quicksilver, and the symbols of Mercury and the Moon and the signatures of Gabriel and Samael should be engraved upon it. The hilt should be encased with tin, with the symbol of Jupiter and the signature of Michael engraved upon it. A copper triangle should extend from the hilt along the blade a short distance on each side. These should bear the symbols of Mercury and Venus. 5 Sephiroth should be engraved upon the handle, as shown. The blade itself should have the word Malchut upon one side and Keys Ut Deus upon the other. The sword should be consecrated on Sunday. A magic circle. From the Complete Book of Magic Science, unpublished. The above figure is a complete and faithful representation of a magic circle as designed by medieval conjurers for the invocation of spirits. The magician accompanied by his assistant takes his place at the point formed by the crossing of the central lines marked Magi Stir. The words about the circle are the names of the invisible intelligences, and the small crosses mark points at which certain prayers and invocations are recited. The small circle outside is prepared for the spirit to be invoked, and while in use has the signature of the desired intelligence traced within the triangle. P103 long narrow strip of virgin parchment and must be hung upon 12 crosses made of the wood of cross thorn. Upon the parchment you must write the names and symbols according to the figure which follows. Outside this first circle make the second as follows. First secure a thread of red silk that has been spun or twisted to the left instead of the right. Then place in the ground 12 crosses made of laurel leaves, and also prepare a long strip of new white paper. Write with an unused pen the characters and symbols as seen on the second circle. Wind this latter strip of paper around with the red silken thread and pin them upon the 12 crosses of laurel leaves. Outside this second circle make a third one which is also of virgin parchment and pinned upon 12 crosses of consecrated palm. When you have made these 3 circles, retire into them until at last you stand in the center upon a pentagram drawn in the midst of the great cross first drawn. Now, to ensure success, do everything according to the description, and when you have read off the sacred invocation pronounce the name of the spirit which you desire to appear. It is essential that you pronounce the name very distinctly. You must also note the day and the hour, for each spirit can only be invoked at certain times. While the black magician at the time of signing his pact with the elemental demon may be fully convinced that he is strong enough to control indefinitely the powers placed at his disposal, he is speedily undeceived. Before many years elapse he must turn all his energies to the problem of self-preservation. A world of horrors to which he has attuned himself by his own covetousness looms nearer every day, until he exists upon the edge of a seething maelstrom, expecting momentarily to be sucked down into its turbid depths. Afraid to die because he will become the servant of his own demon, the magician commits crime after crime to prolong his wretched earthly existence. Realizing that life is maintained by the aid of a mysterious universal life force which is the common property of all creatures, the black magician often becomes an occult vampire, stealing this energy from others. According to medieval superstition, black magicians turned themselves into werewolves and roamed the earth at night, attacking defenseless victims for the life force contained in their blood. Modus operandi for the invocation of spirits. The following condensed extract from an ancient manuscript is reproduced herewith as representative of the ritualism of ceremonial magic. The extract is from the Complete Book of Magic Science, an unpublished manuscript, original in the British Museum, with Pentacles in colors, mentioned by Francis Barrett in his Magus. Opening prayer. Omnipotent and eternal God, who hath ordained the whole creation for thy praise and glory and for the salvation of man, I earnestly beseech thee that thou wouldst send one of thy spirits of the order of Jupiter, one of the messengers of Tzadkiel whom thou hast appointed governor of thy firmament at the present time, most faithfully, willingly, and readily to show me these things which I shall ask, command or require of him, and truly execute my desires. Nevertheless, O most holy God, thy will and not mine be done through J.C., thine only begotten Son our Lord. Amen. The Invocation. The magician, having properly consecrated his vestments and utensils and being protected by his circle, now calls upon the spirits to appear and accede to his demands. Spirits, whose assistance I require, behold the sign and the very hallowed names of God full of power. Obey the power of this our pentacle, go out your hidden caves and dark places, cease your hurtful occupations to those unhappy mortals whom without ceasing you torment. Come into this place where the divine goodness has assembled us, be attentive to our orders and known to our just demands, believe not that your resistance will cause us to abandon our operations. Nothing can dispense with your obeying us. We command you by the mysterious names Ilahi Agla Elohim Adonai Jibord. Amen. I call upon thee, Tzadkiel, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, blessed Trinity, unspeakable unity. I invoke and entreat thee, Tzadkiel, in this hour to attend to the words and conjurations which I shall use this day by the holy names of God Ilahi El Elohim Elion Zebaoth Eskaria Ea Adonai Tetragrammaton. I conjure thee, I exorcise thee, thou spirit Tzadkiel, by these holy names Hagios O Theos Isiros Athanatos Paracletus Agla Alpha Et Omega Iathaglan Broth Abil Anathiel Tetragrammaton, and by all other great and glorious, holy, and unspeakable, mysterious, mighty, powerful, incomprehensible names of God, that you attend unto the words of my mouth, and send unto me Pabiel or other of your ministering, serving spirits, who may show me such things as I shall demand of him in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. I entreat thee, Pabiel, by the whole spirit of heaven, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominations, witnesses, powers, principalities, archangels, and angels, by the holy, great, and glorious angels Orphaneal Tetradigial Salamla Asamoy Pastor Podi, that thou come forthwith, readily show thyself that we may see you and audibly hear you, speak unto us and fulfill our desires, and by your star which is Jupiter, and by all the constellations of heaven, and by whatsoever you obey, and by your character which you have given, proposed, and confirmed, that you attend unto me according to the prayer and petitions which I have made unto Almighty God, and that you forthwith send me one of your ministering spirits, who may willingly, truly, and faithfully fulfill all my desires, and that you command him to appear unto me in the form of a beautiful angel, gently, courteously, affably, and meekly, entering into communication with me, and that he neither permitting any evil spirit to approach in any sort of hurt, terrify or affright me in any way nor deceiving me in any wise. Through the virtue of our Lord J.C., in whose name I attend, wait for, and expect thy appearance. Fiat, fiat, fiat. Amen, amen, amen. Interrogatories. Having summoned the spirit unto his presence, the magician shall question him as follows: Comest thou in peace in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost? And the spirit shall answer, Yes. Thou art welcome, noble spirit. What is thy name? And the spirit shall answer, Pabiel. I have called thee in the name of Jesu of Nazareth, at whose name every knee doth bow in heaven, earth, and hell, and every tongue shall confess there is no name like unto the name of Jesus, who hath given power unto man to bind and to loose all things in his most holy name, yea even unto those that trust in his salvation. Art thou the messenger of Tzadkiel? And the spirit shall answer, Yes. Wilt thou confirm thyself unto me at this time, and henceforth reveal all things unto me that I shall desire to know, and teach me how I may increase in wisdom and knowledge, and show unto me all the secrets of the magic art, and of all liberal sciences, that I may thereby set forth the glory of Almighty God? And the spirit shall answer, Yes. Then I pray thee, give and confirm thy character unto me, whereby I may call thee at all times, and also swear unto me this oath, and I will religiously keep my vow and covenant unto Almighty God, and will courteously receive thee at all times where thou dost appear unto me. License to depart. Forasmuch as thou comest in peace and quietness, and hath answered the Pentagram. From Levi's Transcendental Magic. The Pentagram. The pentagram is the figure of the microcosm, the magical formula of man. It is the one rising out of the four, the human soul rising from the bondage of the animal nature. It is the true light, the star of the morning. It marks the location of 5 mysterious centers of force, the awakening of which is the supreme secret of white magic. Form of pact with the spirit of Jupiter. From the complete book of magic science. The aforesaid bond of spirits, together with the seal and character of the planetary angel, must be written on virgin parchment and laid before the spirit for signature when he appears. At that time the invocant must not lose confidence but be patient, firm, bold, and persevering, and take care that he asks nor requires nothing of the spirit but with a view to the glory of God and the well-being fellow creatures. Having obtained his desires of the spirit, the invocant may license him to depart. P. 104 Unto my petitions, I give humble and hearty thanks unto Almighty God, in whose name I called and thou camest, and now thou mayest depart in peace unto thine orders and return unto me again at what time soever I shall call thee by thine oath, or by thy name, or by thine order, or by thine office which is granted thee from the Creator, and the power of God be with me and thee and upon the whole issue of God. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. Note: it would be advisable for the invocant to remain in the circle for a few minutes after reciting the license, and if the place of operation be in the open air, let him destroy all traces of the circle, etc., and return quietly to his home. But should the operation be performed in a retired part of a house, etc., the circle may remain, as it might serve in a like future operation, but the room or building must be locked up to avoid the intrusion of strangers. The agreement set forth above is purely ceremonial magic. In the case of black magic, it is the magician and not the demon who must sign the pact. When the black magician binds an elemental to his service, a battle of wits ensues, which the demon eventually wins. With his own blood the magician signs the pact between himself and the demon, for in the arcanum of magic it is declared that he controls the soul who controls the blood of another. As long as the magician does not fail, the elemental will fulfill to the letter his obligation under the pact, but the demon will try in every possible way to prevent the magician from carrying out his part of the contract. When the conjurer, ensconced within his circle, has evoked the spirit he desires to control and has made known his intention, the spirit will answer somewhat as follows: I cannot accede to your request nor fulfill it, unless after 50 years you give yourself to me, body and soul, to do with as I may please. If the magician refuses, other terms will be discussed. The spirit may say, I will remain in your service as long as on every Friday morning you will go forth upon the public street giving alms in the name of Lucifer. The first time you fail in this you belong to me. If the magician still refuses, realizing that the demon will make it impossible for him to fulfill his contract, other terms will be discussed, until at last a pact is agreed upon. It may read as follows: I hereby promise the great spirit Lucifuge, prince of demons, that each year I will bring unto him a human soul to do with as it may please him, and in return Lucifuge promises to bestow upon me the treasures of the earth and fulfill my every desire for the length of my natural life. If I fail to bring him each year the offering specified above, then my own soul shall be forfeit to him. Signed. Invocant signs pact with his own blood. The pentagram in symbolism, an inverted figure, always signifies a perverted power. The average person does not even suspect the occult properties of emblematic pentacles. On this subject the great Paracelsus has written, no doubt many will scoff at the seals, their characters, and their uses, which are described in these books, because it seems incredible to them that metals and characters which are dead should have any power and effect. Yet no one has ever proved that the metals and also the characters as we know them are dead, for the salts, sulfur, and quintessences of metals are the highest preservatives of human life and are far superior to all other simples. Translated from the original German. The black magician cannot use the symbols of white magic without bringing down upon himself the forces of white magic, which would be fatal to his schemes. He must therefore distort the hierograms so that they typify the occult fact that he himself is distorting the principles for which the symbols stand. Black magic is not a fundamental art, it is the misuse of an art. Therefore it has no symbols of its own. It merely takes the emblematic figures of white magic, and by inverting and reversing them signifies that it is left-handed. A good instance of this practice is found in the pentagram, or five-pointed star, made of 5 connected lines. This figure is the time-honored symbol of the magical arts, and signifies the 5 properties of the great magical agent, the 5 senses of man, the 5 elements of nature, the 5 extremities of the human body. By means of the pentagram within his own soul, man not only may master and govern all creatures inferior to himself, but may demand consideration at the hands of those superior to himself. The pentagram is used extensively in black magic, but when so used its form always differs in one of 3 ways. The star may be broken at one point by not permitting the converging lines to touch, it may be inverted by having 1 point down and 2 up, or it may be distorted by having the points of varying lengths. When used in black magic, the pentagram is called the sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil. The star with 2 points upward is also called the goat of Mendes, because the inverted star is the same shape as a goat's head. When the upright star turns and the upper point falls to the bottom, it signifies the fall of the morning star. The pentacles of the 7 planets and the seals and characters of the planetary angels. From a medieval book of spirits, unpublished. The 7 large circle are the planets, while the 2 small circles under each contain the seal and the character of the controlling intelligence of the planet. The elements and their inhabitants. For the most comprehensive and lucid exposition of occult pneumatology, the branch of philosophy dealing with spiritual substances, extant, mankind is indebted to Philippus Orolus Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, prince of alchemists and hermetic philosophers and true possessor of the royal secret, the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. Paracelsus believed that each of the 4 primary elements known to the ancients, earth, fire, air, and water, consisted of a subtle, vaporous principle and a gross corporeal substance. Air is, therefore, twofold in nature: tangible atmosphere and an intangible, volatile substratum which may be termed spiritual air. Fire is visible and invisible, discernible and indiscernible, a spiritual, ethereal flame manifesting through a material, substantial flame. Carrying the analogy further, water consists of a dense fluid and a potential essence of a fluidic nature. Earth has likewise 2 essential parts, the lower being fixed, terreous, immobile, the higher, rarefied, mobile, and virtual. The general term elements has been applied to the lower, or physical, phases of these 4 primary principles, and the name elemental essences to their corresponding invisible, spiritual constitutions. Minerals, plants, animals, and men live in a world composed of the gross side of these 4 elements, and from various combinations of them construct their living organisms. Henry Drummond, in Natural Law in the Spiritual World, describes this process as follows: if we analyze this material point at which all life starts, we shall find it to consist of a clear structureless, jelly-like substance resembling albumin or white of egg. It is made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Its name is protoplasm. And it is not only the structural unit with which all living bodies start in life, but with which they are subsequently built up. Protoplasm, says Huxley, simple or nucleated, is the formal basis of all life. It is the clay of the potter. The water element of the ancient philosophers has been metamorphosed into the hydrogen of modern science, the air has become oxygen, the fire, nitrogen, the earth, carbon. Just as visible nature is populated by an infinite number of living creatures, so, according to Paracelsus, the invisible, spiritual counterpart of visible nature, composed of the tenuous principles of the visible elements, is inhabited by a host of peculiar beings, to whom he has given the name elementals, and which have later been termed the nature spirits. Paracelsus divided these people of the elements into 4 distinct groups, which he called gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders. He taught that they were really living entities, many resembling human beings in shape, and inhabiting worlds of their own, unknown to man because his undeveloped senses were incapable of functioning beyond the limitations of the grosser elements. The civilizations of Greece, Rome, Egypt, China, and India believed implicitly in satyrs, sprites, and goblins. They peopled the sea with mermaids, the rivers and fountains with nymphs, the air with fairies, the fire with lares and penates, and the earth with fauns, dryads, and hamadryads. These nature spirits were held in the highest esteem, and propitiatory offerings were made to them. Occasionally, as the result of atmospheric conditions or the peculiar sensitiveness of the devotee, they became visible. Many authors wrote concerning them in terms which signify that they had actually beheld these inhabitants of nature's finer realms. A number of authorities are of the opinion that many of the gods worshipped by the pagans were elementals, for some of these invisibles were believed to be of commanding stature and magnificent deportment. The Greeks gave the name daemon to some of these elementals, especially those of the higher orders, and worshipped them. Probably the most famous of these daemons is the mysterious spirit which instructed Socrates, and of whom that great philosopher spoke in the highest terms. Those who have devoted much study to the invisible constitution of man realize that it is quite probable the daemon of Socrates and the angel of Jacob Boehme were in reality not elementals, but the overshadowing divine natures of these philosophers themselves. In his notes to Apuleius on the God of Socrates, Thomas Taylor says, as the daemon of Socrates, therefore, was doubtless one of the highest order, as may be inferred from the intellectual superiority of Socrates to most other men, Apuleius is justified in calling this daemon a god. And that the daemon of Socrates indeed was divine, is evident from the testimony of Socrates himself in the first Alcibiades, for in the course of that dialogue he clearly says, I have long been of the opinion that the God did not as yet direct me to hold any conversation with you. And in the Apology he most unequivocally evinces that this daemon is allotted a divine transcendency, considered as ranking in the order of daemons. The idea once held, that the invisible elements surrounding and interpenetrating the earth were peopled with living, intelligent beings, may seem ridiculous to the prosaic mind of today. This doctrine, however, has found favor with some of the greatest intellects of the world. The Sylphs of Phaseus Cardan, the philosopher of Milan, the salamander seen by Benvenuto Cellini, the pen of Saint Anthony, and Le Petit Homme Rouge, the little red man, or gnome, of Napoleon Bonaparte, have found their places in the pages of history. Literature has also perpetuated the concept of nature spirits. The mischievous Puck of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, the elementals of Alexander Pope's Rosicrucian poem, the Rape of the Lock, the mysterious creatures of Lord Lytton's Zanoni, James Barrie's immortal Tinker Bell, and the famous bowlers that Rip Van Winkle encountered in the Catskill Mountains, are well-known characters to students of literature. The folklore and mythology of all peoples abound in legends concerning these mysterious little figures who haunt old castles, guard treasures in the depths of the earth, and build their homes under the spreading protection of toadstools. Fairies are the delight of childhood, and most children give them up with reluctance. Not so very long ago the greatest minds of the world believed in the existence of fairies, and it is still an open question as to whether Plato, Socrates, and Iamblichus were wrong when they avowed their reality. Paracelsus, when describing the substances which constitute the bodies of the elementals, divided flesh into two kinds, the first being that which we have all inherited through Adam. This is the visible, corporeal flesh. The second was that flesh which had not descended from Adam and, being more attenuated, was not subject to the limitations of the former. The bodies of the elementals were composed of this transubstantial flesh. Paracelsus stated that there is as much difference between the bodies of men and the bodies of the nature spirits as there is between matter and spirit. Yet, he adds, the elementals are not spirits, because they have flesh, blood, and bones, they live and propagate offspring, they cat and talk, act, and sleep, and see, and consequently they cannot be properly called spirits. They are beings occupying a place between men and spirits, resembling men and spirits, resembling men and women in their organization and form, and resembling spirits in the rapidity of their locomotion. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Later the same author calls these creatures composita, inasmuch as the substance out of which they are composed seems to be a composite of spirit and matter. He uses color to explain the idea. Thus, the mixture of blue and red gives purple, a new color, resembling neither of the others yet composed of both. Such is the case with the nature spirits, they resemble neither spiritual creatures nor material beings, yet are composed of the substance which we may call spiritual matter, or ether. Paracelsus further adds that whereas man is composed of several natures, spirit, soul, mind, and body, combined in one unit, the elemental has but one principle, the ether out of which it is composed and in which it lives. The reader must remember that by ether a salamander, according to Paracelsus. From Paracelsus Auslegung von 30 Magis Figuren. The Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Persians often mistook the salamanders for gods, because of their radiant splendor and great power. The Greeks, following the example of earlier nations, deified the fire spirits and in their honor kept incense and altar fire, burning perpetually. P 106 is meant the spiritual essence of one of the four elements. There are as many ethers as there are elements and as many distinct families of nature spirits as there are ethers. These families are completely isolated in their own ether and have no intercourse with the denizens of the other ethers, but, as man has within his own nature centers of consciousness sensitive to the impulses of all the four ethers, it is possible for any of the elemental kingdoms to communicate with him under proper conditions. The nature spirits cannot be destroyed by the grosser elements, such as material fire, earth, air, or water, for they function in a rate of vibration higher than that of earthy substances. Being composed of only one element or principle, the ether in which they function, they have no immortal spirit and at death merely disintegrate back into the element from which they were originally individualized. No individual consciousness is preserved after death, for there is no superior vehicle present to contain it. Being made of but one substance, there is no friction between vehicles, thus there is little wear or tear incurred by their bodily functions, and they therefore live to great age. Those composed of earth ether are the shortest lived, those composed of air ether, the longest. The average length of life is between 300 and 1,000 years. Paracelsus maintained that they live in conditions similar to our Earth environments, and are somewhat subject to disease. These creatures are thought to be incapable of spiritual development, but most of them are of a high moral character. Concerning the elemental ethers in which the nature spirits exist, Paracelsus wrote, they live in the four elements, the nymphi in the element of water, the sylphs in that of the air, the pygmies in the earth, and the salamanders in fire. They are also called undini, sylvesters, gnomi, vulcani, and sea. Each species moves only in the element to which it belongs, and neither of them can go out of its appropriate element, which is to them as the air is to us, or the water to fishes, and none of them can live in the element belonging to another class. To each elemental being the element in which it lives is transparent, invisible and respirable, as the atmosphere is to ourselves. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. The reader should be careful not to confuse the nature spirits with the true life waves evolving through the invisible worlds. While the elementals are composed of only one etheric, or atomic, essence, the angels, archangels, and other superior, transcendental entities have composite organisms, consisting of a spiritual nature and a chain of vehicles to express that nature not unlike those of men, but not including the physical body with its attendant limitations. To the philosophy of nature spirits is generally attributed an Eastern origin, probably Brahmanic, and Paracelsus secured his knowledge of them from Oriental sages with whom he came in contact during his lifetime of philosophical wanderings. The Egyptians and Greeks gleaned their information from the same source. The four main divisions of nature spirits must now be considered separately, according to the teachings of Paracelsus and the Abbé de Villers and such scanty writings of other authors as are available. The gnomes, the elementals who dwell in that attenuated body of the earth which is called the terreous ether, are grouped together under the general heading of gnomes. The name is probably derived from the Greek genomus, meaning earth dweller. See New English Dictionary. Just as there are many types of human beings evolving through the objective physical elements of nature, so there are many types of gnomes evolving through the subjective ethereal body of nature. These earth spirits work in an element so close in vibratory rate to the material earth that they have immense power over its rocks and flora, and also over the mineral elements in the animal and human kingdoms. Some, like the pygmies, work with the stones, gems, and metals, and are supposed to be the guardians of hidden treasures. They live in caves, far down in what the Scandinavians called the land of the Nibelungen. In Wagner's wonderful opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelungen, Alberich makes himself king of the pygmies and forces these little creatures to gather for him the treasures concealed beneath the surface of the earth. Besides the pygmies there are other gnomes, who are called tree and forest sprites. To this group belong the Sylvesters, Satyrs, Pans, Dryads, Hamadryads, Daedalus, Elves, Brownies, and little old men of the woods. Paracelsus states that the gnomes build houses of substances resembling in their constituencies alabaster, marble, and cement, but the true nature of these materials is unknown, having no counterpart in physical nature. Some families of gnomes gather in communities, while others are indigenous to the substances with and in which they work. For example, the Hamadryads live and die with the plants or trees of which they are a part. Every shrub and flower is said to have its own nature spirit, which often uses the physical body of the plant as its habitation. The ancient philosophers, recognizing the principle of intelligence manifesting itself in every department of nature alike, believed that the quality of natural selection exhibited by creatures not possessing organized mentalities expressed in reality the decisions of the nature spirits themselves. C. M. Gailey, in the Classic Myths, says, "It was a pleasing trait in the old paganism that it loved to trace in every operation of nature the agency of deity. The imagination of the Greeks peopled the regions of earth and sea with divinities, to whose agency it attributed the phenomena that our philosophy ascribes to the operation of natural law. Thus, in behalf of the plant it worked with, the elemental accepted and rejected food elements, deposited coloring matter therein, preserved and protected the seed, and performed many other beneficent offices. Each species was served by a different but appropriate type of nature spirit. Those working with poisonous shrubs, for example, were offensive in their appearance. It is said the nature spirits of poison hemlock resemble closely tiny human skeletons, thinly covered with a semi-transparent flesh. They live in and through the hemlock, and if it be cut down remain with the broken shoots until both die, but while there is the slightest evidence of life in the shrub it shows the presence of the elemental guardian. Great trees also have their nature spirits, but these are much larger than the elementals of smaller plants. The labors of the pygmies include the cutting of the crystals in the rocks and the development of veins of ore. When the gnomes are laboring with animals or human beings, their work is confined to the tissues corresponding with their own natures. Hence they work with the bones, which belong to the mineral kingdom, and the ancients believed the reconstruction of broken members to be impossible without the cooperation of the elementals. The gnomes are of various sizes, most of them much smaller than human beings, though some of them have the power of changing their stature at will. This is the result of the extreme mobility of the element in which they function. Concerning them the Abbé de Villers wrote, "The earth is filled well nigh to its center with gnomes, people of slight stature, who are the guardians of treasures, minerals and precious stones. They are ingenious, friends of man, and easy to govern." Not all authorities agree concerning the amiable disposition of the gnomes. Many state that they are of a tricky and malicious nature, difficult to manage, and treacherous. Writers agree, however, that when their confidence is won they are faithful and true. The philosophers and initiates of the ancient world were instructed concerning these mysterious little people and were taught how to communicate with them and gain their cooperation in undertakings of importance. The Magi were always warned, however, never to betray the trust of the elementals, for if they did, the invisible creatures, working through the subjective nature of man, could cause them endless sorrow and probably ultimate destruction. So long as the mystic served others, the gnomes would serve him, but if he sought to use their aid selfishly to gain temporal power they would turn upon him with unrelenting fury. The same was true if he sought to deceive them. The earth spirits meet at certain times of the year in great conclaves, as Shakespeare suggests in his Midsummer Night's Dream, where the elementals all gather to rejoice in the beauty and harmony of nature and the prospects of an excellent harvest. The gnomes are ruled over by a king, whom they greatly love and revere. His name is Gob, hence his subjects are often called goblins. Medieval mystics gave a corner of creation, one of the cardinal points, to each of the four kingdoms of nature spirits, and because of their earthy character the gnomes were assigned to the north, the place recognized by the ancients as the source of darkness and death. One of the four main divisions of human disposition was also assigned to the gnomes, and because so many of them dwelt in the darkness of caves and the gloom of forests, their temperament was said to be melancholy, gloomy, and despondent. By this it is not meant that they themselves are of such disposition, but rather that they have special control over elements of similar consistency. The gnomes marry and have families, and the female gnomes are called Nomides. Some wear clothing woven of the element in which they live. In other instances their garments are part of themselves and grow with them, like the fur of animals. The gnomes are said to have insatiable appetites, and to spend a great part of the rime eating, but they earn their food by diligent and conscientious conventional gnomes. From Gellerup's den Ildra Edisgoods Ange. The type of gnome most frequently seen is the brownie, or elf, a mischievous and grotesque little creature from 12 to 18 inches high, usually dressed in green or russet brown. Most of them appear as very aged, often with long white beards, and their figures are inclined to rotundity. They can be seen scampering out of holes in the stumps of trees, and sometimes they vanish by actually dissolving into the tree itself. P. 107 Labor. Most of them are of a miserly temperament, fond of storing things away in secret places. There is abundant evidence of the fact that small children often see the gnomes, inasmuch as their contact with the material side of nature is not yet complete and they still function more or less consciously in the invisible worlds. According to Paracelsus, man lives in the exterior elements and the elementals live in the interior elements. The latter have dwellings and clothing, manners and customs, languages and governments of their own, in the same sense as the bees have their queens and herds of animals their leaders. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Paracelsus differs somewhat from the Greek mystics concerning the environmental limitations imposed on the nature spirits. The Swiss philosopher constitutes them of subtle invisible ethers. According to this hypothesis they would be visible only at certain times and only to those en rapport with their ethereal vibrations. The Greeks, on the other hand, apparently believed that many nature spirits had material constitutions capable of functioning in the physical world. Often the recollection of a dream is so vivid that, upon awakening, a person actually believes that he has passed through a physical experience. The difficulty of accurately judging as to the end of physical sight and the beginning of ethereal vision may account for these differences of opinion. Even this explanation, however, does not satisfactorily account for the satyr which, according to Saint Jerome, was captured alive during the reign of Constantine and exhibited to the people. It was of human form with the horns and feet of a goat. After its death it was preserved in salt and taken to the emperor that he might testify to its reality. It is within the bounds of probability that this curiosity was what modern science knows as a monstrosity. The Undines, as the gnomes were limited in their function to the elements of the earth, so the Undines, a name given to the family of water elementals, function in the invisible, spiritual essence called humid, or liquid, ether. In its vibratory rate this is close to the element water, and so the Undines are able to control, to a great degree, the course and function of this fluid in nature. Beauty seems to be the keynote of the water spirits. Wherever we find them pictured in art or sculpture, they abound in symmetry and grace. Controlling the water element, which has always been a feminine symbol, it is natural that the water spirits should most often be symbolized as female. There are many groups of Undines. Some inhabit waterfalls, where they can be seen in the spray, others are indigenous to swiftly moving rivers, some have their habitat in dripping, oozing fens or marshes, while other groups dwell in clear mountain lakes. According to the philosophers of antiquity, every fountain had its nymph, every ocean wave its Oceanid. The water spirits were known under such names as Oreades, Nereides, Limoniads, Naiades, water sprites, sea maids, mermaids, and Potamides. Often the water nymphs derived their names from the streams, lakes, or seas in which they dwelt. In describing them, the ancients agreed on certain salient features. In general, nearly all the undines closely resembled human beings in appearance and size, though the ones inhabiting small streams and fountains were of correspondingly lesser proportions. It was believed that these water spirits were occasionally capable of assuming the appearance of normal human beings and actually associating with men and women. There are many legends about these spirits and their adoption by the families of fishermen, but in nearly every case the undines heard the call of the waters and returned to the realm of Neptune, the king of the sea. Practically nothing is known concerning the male undines. The water spirits did not establish homes in the same way that the gnomes did, but lived in coral caves under the ocean or among the reeds growing on the banks of rivers or the shores of lakes. Among the Celts there is a legend to the effect that Ireland was peopled, before the coming of its present inhabitants, by a strange race of semi-divine creatures. With the coming of the modern Celts they retired into the marshes and fens, where they remain even to this day. Diminutive undines lived under lily pads and in little houses of moss sprayed by waterfalls. The undines worked with the vital essences and liquids in plants, animals, and human beings, and were present in everything containing water. When seen, the undines generally resembled the goddesses of Greek statuary. They rose from the water draped in mist and could not exist very long apart from it. There are many families of undines, each with its peculiar limitations. It is impossible to consider them here in detail. Their ruler, Nexa, they love and honor, and serve untiringly. Their temperament is said to be vital, and to them has been given as their throne the western corner of creation. They are rather emotional beings, friendly to human life and fond of serving mankind. They are sometimes pictured riding on dolphins or other great fish and seem to have a special love of flowers and plants, which they serve almost as devotedly and intelligently as the gnomes. Ancient poets have said that the songs of the undines were heard in the west wind and that their lives were consecrated to the beautifying of the material earth. The salamanders. The third group of elementals is the salamanders, or spirits of fire, who live in that attenuated, spiritual ether which is the invisible fire element of nature. Without them material fire cannot exist, a match cannot be struck, nor will flint and steel give off their spark without the assistance of a salamander, who immediately appears, so the medieval mystics believed, evoked by friction. Man is unable to communicate successfully with the salamanders, owing to the fiery element in which they dwell, for everything is resolved to ashes that comes into their presence. By specially prepared compounds of herbs and perfumes the philosophers of the ancient world manufactured many kinds of incense. When incense was burned, the vapors which arose were especially suitable as a medium for the expression of these elementals, who, by borrowing the ethereal effluvium from the incense smoke, were able to make their presence felt. The salamanders are as varied in their grouping and arrangement as either the undines or the gnomes. There are many families of them, differing in appearance, size, and dignity. Sometimes the salamanders were visible as small balls of light. Paracelsus says, salamanders have been seen in the shapes of fiery balls, or tongues of fire, running over the fields or peering in houses. Philo Sophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Medieval investigators of the nature spirits were of the opinion that the most common form of salamander was lizard-like in shape, a foot or more in length, and visible as a glowing urodela, twisting and crawling in the midst of the fire. Another group was described as huge flaming giants in flowing robes, protected with sheets of fiery armor. Certain medieval authorities, among them the Abbé de Villers, held that Zarathustra, Zoroaster, was the son of Vesta, believed to have been the wife of Noah, and the great salamander Oromachus. Hence, from that time onward, undying fires have been maintained upon the Persian altars in honor of Zarathustra's flaming father. One most important subdivision of the salamanders was the Actinici. These creatures appeared only as indistinct globes. They were supposed to float over water at night and occasionally to appear as forks of flame on the masts and rigging of ships, St. Elmo's fire. The salamanders were the strongest and most powerful of the elementals, and had as their ruler a magnificent flaming spirit called Jinn, terrible and awe-inspiring in appearance. The salamanders were dangerous and the sages were warned to keep away from them, as the benefits derived from studying them were often not commensurate with the price paid. As the ancients associated heat with the south, this corner of creation was assigned to the salamanders as their drone, and they exerted special influence over all beings of fiery or tempestuous temperament. In both animals and men, the salamanders work through the emotional nature by means of the body heat, the liver, and the bloodstream. Without their assistance there would be no warmth. The Sylphs, while the sages said that the fourth class of elementals, or Sylphs, lived in the element of air, they meant by this not the natural atmosphere of the earth, but the invisible, intangible, spiritual medium, an ethereal substance similar in composition to our atmosphere, but far more subtle. In the last Discourse of Socrates, as preserved by Plato in his Phaedo, the condemned philosopher says, "And upon the earth are animals and men, some in a middle region, others, elementals dwelling about the air as we dwell about the sea, others in islands which the air flows round, near the continent, and in a word, the air is used by them as the water and the sea are by us, and the ether is to them what the air is to us. Moreover, the temperament of their seasons is such that they have no disease." Paracelsus disputes this, and live much longer than we do, a mermaid. From Lycosthenes Prodigiorum ac Ostentorum Chronicon. Probably the most famous of the Undines were the mythological mermaids, with which early mariners peopled the seven seas. Belief in the existence of these creatures, the upper half of their bodies human in form and the lower half fish-like, may have been inspired by flocks of penguins seen at great distance, or possibly seals. In medieval descriptions of mermaids, it was also stated that their hair was green like seaweed and that they wore wreaths twisted from the blossoms of subaqueous plants and sea anemones. P 108 and have sight and bearing and smell, and all the other senses, in far greater perfection, in the same degree that air is purer than water or the ether than air. Also they have temples and sacred places in which the gods really dwell, and they hear their voices and receive their answers, and are conscious of them and hold converse with them, and they see the sun, moon, and stars as they really are, and their other blessedness is of a piece with this. While the Sylphs were believed to live among the clouds and in the surrounding air, their true home was upon the tops of mountains. In his editorial notes to the Occult Sciences of Salverd, Anthony Todd Thompson says, "The fays and fairies are evidently of Scandinavian origin, although the name of fairy is supposed to be derived from, or rather is a modification of the Persian peri, an imaginary benevolent being, whose province it was to guard men from the maledictions of evil spirits, but with more probability it may be referred to the Gothic fagur, as the term elves is from alpha, the general appellation for the whole tribe." If this derivation of the name of fairy be admitted, we may date the commencement of the popular belief in British fairies to the period of the Danish conquest. They were supposed to be diminutive aerial beings, beautiful, lively, and beneficent in their intercourse with mortals, inhabiting a region called Fairyland, Alfheimr, commonly appearing on earth at intervals when they left traces of their visits, in beautiful green rings, where the dewy sward had been trodden in their moonlight dances. To the Sylphs the ancients gave the labor of modeling the snowflakes and gathering clouds. This latter they accomplished with the cooperation of the Undines who supplied the moisture. The winds were their particular vehicle and the ancients referred to them as the spirits of the air. They are the highest of all the elementals, their native element being the highest in vibratory rate. They live hundreds of years, often attaining to 1,000 years and never seeming to grow old. The leader of the Sylphs is called Peralda, who is said to dwell on the highest mountain of the earth. The female Sylphs were called sylphids. It is believed that the Sylphs, salamanders, and nymphs had much to do with the oracles of the ancients, that in fact they were the ones who spoke from the depths of the earth and from the air above. The Sylphs sometimes assume human form, but apparently for only short periods of time. Their size varies, but in the majority of cases they are no larger than human beings and often considerably smaller. It is said that the Sylphs have accepted human beings into their communities and have permitted them to live there for a considerable period. In fact, Paracelsus wrote of such an incident, but of course it could not have occurred while the human stranger was in his physical body. By some, the muses of the Greeks are believed to have been Sylphs, for these spirits are said to gather around the mind of the dreamer, the poet, and the artist, and inspire him with their intimate knowledge of the beauties and workings of nature. To the Sylphs were given the eastern corner of creation. Their temperament is mirthful, changeable, and eccentric. The peculiar qualities common to men of genius are supposedly the result of the cooperation of Sylphs, whose aid also brings with it the sylphic inconsistency. The Sylphs labor with the gases of the human body and indirectly with the nervous system, where their inconstancy is again apparent. They have no fixed domicile, but wander about from place to place, elemental nomads, invisible but ever-present powers in the intelligent activity of the universe. General observations. Certain of the ancients, differing with Paracelsus, shared the opinion that the elemental kingdoms were capable of waging war upon one another, and they recognized in the battlings of the elements disagreements among these kingdoms of nature spirits. When lightning struck a rock and splintered it, they believed that the salamanders were attacking the gnomes. As they could not attack one another on the plane of their own peculiar etheric essences, owing to the fact that there was no vibratory correspondence between the four ethers of which these kingdoms are composed, they had to attack through a common denominator, namely, the material substance of the physical universe over which they had a certain amount of power. Wars were also fought within the groups themselves. One army of gnomes would attack another army, and civil war would be rife among them. Philosophers of long ago solved the problems of nature's apparent inconsistencies by individualizing and personifying all its forces, crediting them with having temperaments not unlike the human and then expecting them to exhibit typical human inconsistencies. The four fixed signs of the zodiac were assigned to the four kingdoms of elementals. The gnomes were said to be of the nature of Taurus, the undines, of the nature of Scorpio, the salamanders exemplified the constitution of Leo, while the Sylphs manipulated the emanations of Aquarius. The Christian Church gathered all the elemental entities together under the title of demon. This is a misnomer with far-reaching consequences, for to the average mind the word demon means an evil thing, and the nature spirits are essentially no more malevolent than are the minerals, plants, and animals. Many of the early church fathers asserted that they had met and debated with the elementals. As already stated, the nature spirits are without hope of immortality, although some philosophers have maintained that in isolated cases immortality was conferred upon them by adepts and initiates who understood certain subtle principles of the invisible world. As disintegration takes place in the physical world, so it takes place in the ethereal counterpart of physical substance. Under normal conditions at death, a nature spirit is merely resolved back into the transparent primary essence from which it was originally individualized. Whatever evolutionary growth is made is recorded solely in the consciousness of that primary essence or element and not in the temporarily individualized entity of the elemental. Being without man's compound organism and lacking his spiritual and intellectual vehicles, the nature spirits are subhuman in their rational intelligence, but from their functions limited to one element has resulted a specialized type of intelligence far ahead of man in those lines of research peculiar to the element in which they exist. The terms incubus and succubus have been applied indiscriminately by the Church Fathers to elementals. The incubus and succubus, however, are evil and unnatural creations, whereas elementals is a collective term for all the inhabitants of the four elemental essences. According to Paracelsus, the incubus and succubus, which are male and female respectively, are parasitical creatures subsisting upon the evil thoughts and emotions of the astral body. These terms are also applied to the superphysical organisms of sorcerers and black magicians. While these larvae are in no sense imaginary beings, they are, nevertheless, the offspring of the imagination. By the ancient sages they were recognized as the invisible cause of vice because they hover in the ethers surrounding the morally weak and continually incite them to excesses of a degrading nature. For this reason they frequent the atmosphere of the dope den, the dive, and the brothel, where they attach themselves to those unfortunates who have given themselves up to iniquity. By permitting his senses to become deadened through indulgence in habit-forming drugs or alcoholic stimulants, the individual becomes temporarily en rapport with these denizens of the astral plane. The houris seen by the hashish or opium addict and the lurid monsters which torment the victim of delirium tremens are examples of submundane beings, visible only to those whose evil practices are the magnet for their attraction. Differing widely from the elementals and also the incubus and succubus is the vampire, which is defined by Paracelsus as the astral body of a person either living or dead, usually the latter state. The vampire seeks to prolong existence upon the physical plane by robbing the living of their vital energies and misappropriating such energies to its own ends. In his De Ente Spirituali Paracelsus writes thus of these malignant beings: a healthy and pure person cannot become obsessed by them, because such larvae can only act upon men if the latter make room for them in their minds. A healthy mind is a castle that cannot be invaded without the will of its master, but if they are allowed to enter, they excite the passions of men and women, they create cravings in them, they produce bad thoughts which act injuriously upon the brain, they sharpen the animal intellect and suffocate the moral sense. Evil spirits obsess only those human beings in whom the animal nature is predominating. Minds that are illuminated by the spirit of truth cannot be possessed. Only those who are habitually guided by their own lower impulses may become subjected to their influences. See Paracelsus, by Franz Hartmann. A strange concept, and one somewhat at variance with the conventional, is that evolved by the Count de Gabalis concerning the Immaculate Conception, namely, that it represents the union of a human being with an elemental. Among the offspring of such unions he lists Hercules, Achilles, Aeneas, Theseus, Melchizedek, the divine Plato, Apollonius of Tyana, and Merlin the magician. ASYLPH. From sketch by Howard Woke. The SYLPHs were changeable entities, passing to and fro with the rapidity of lightning. They work through the gases and ethers of the earth and are kindly disposed toward human beings. They are nearly always represented as winged, sometimes as tiny cherubs and at other times as delicate fairies. Hermetic pharmacology, chemistry, and therapeutics. The art of healing was originally one of the secret sciences of the priestcraft, and the mystery of its source is obscured by the same veil which hides the genesis of religious belief. All higher forms of knowledge were originally in the possession of the sacerdotal castes. The temple was the cradle of civilization. The priests, exercising their divine prerogative, made the laws and enforced them, appointed the rulers and controlled them, ministered to the needs of the living, and guided the destinies of the dead. All branches of learning were monopolized by the priesthood, who admitted into their ranks only those intellectually and morally qualified to perpetuate their arcanum. The following quotation from Plato's Statesman is apropos of the subject: ******* In Egypt, the king himself is not allowed to reign, unless he have priestly powers, and if he should be one of another class, and have obtained the throne by violence, he must get enrolled in the priestcraft. Candidates aspiring to membership in the religious orders underwent severe tests to prove their worthiness. These ordeals were called initiations. Those who passed them successfully were welcomed as brothers by the priests and were instructed in the secret teachings. Among the ancients, philosophy, science, and religion were never considered as separate units, each was regarded as an integral part of the whole. Philosophy was scientific and religious, science was philosophic and religious, religion was philosophic and scientific. Perfect wisdom was considered unattainable save as the result of harmonizing all three of these expressions of mental and moral activity. While modern physicians accredit Hippocrates with being the father of medicine, the ancient Therapeutae ascribed to the immortal Hermes the distinction of being the founder of the art of healing. Clemens Alexandrinus, in describing the books purported to be from the stylus of Hermes, divided the sacred writings into 6 general classifications, one of which, the Pastophorus, was devoted to the science of medicine. The Smaragdin, or emerald tablet found in the valley of Hebron and generally accredited to Hermes, is in reality a chemical formula of a high and secret order. Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician, during the 5th century before Christ, dissociated the healing art from the other sciences of the temple and thereby established a precedent for separateness. One of the consequences is the present widespread crass scientific materialism. The ancients realized the interdependence of the sciences. The moderns do not, and as a result, incomplete systems of learning are attempting to maintain isolated individualism. The obstacles which confront present-day scientific research are largely the result of prejudicial limitations imposed by those who are unwilling to accept that which transcends the concrete perceptions of the 5 primary human senses. The Paracelsian system of medical philosophy during the Middle Ages, the long-ignored axioms and formulae of Hermetic wisdom were assembled once more, and chronicled, and systematic attempts were made to test their accuracy. To Theophrastus of Hohenheim, who called himself Paracelsus, a name meaning greater than Celsus, the world is indebted for much of the knowledge it now possesses of the ancient systems of medicine. Paracelsus devoted his entire life to the study and exposition of Hermetic philosophy. Every notion and theory was grist to his mill, and, while members of the medical fraternity belittle his memory now as they opposed his system then, the occult world knows that he will yet be recognized as the greatest physician of all times. While the heterodox and exotic temperament of Paracelsus has been held against him by his enemies, and his wanderlust has been called vagabondage, he was one of the few minds who intelligently sought to reconcile the art of healing with the philosophic and religious systems of paganism and Christianity. In defending his right to seek knowledge in all parts of the earth, and among all classes of society, Paracelsus wrote, "Therefore I consider that it is for me a matter of praise, not of blame, that I have hitherto and worthily pursued my wanderings. For this will I bear witness respecting nature, he who will investigate her ways must travel her books with his feet. That which is written is investigated through its letters, but nature from land to land, as often a land so often a leaf. Thus is the codex of nature, thus must its leaves be turned." Paracelsus, by John Maxon Stillman. Paracelsus was a great observationalist, and those who knew him best have called him the second Hermes and the Trismegistus of Switzerland. He traveled Europe from end to end, and may have penetrated eastern lands while running down superstitions and ferreting out supposedly lost doctrines. From the gypsies he learned much concerning the uses of simples, and apparently from the Arabians concerning the making of talismans and the influences of the heavenly bodies. Paracelsus felt that the healing of the sick was of far greater importance than the maintaining of an orthodox medical standing, so he sacrificed what might otherwise have been a dignified medical career and at the cost of lifelong persecution bitterly attacked the therapeutic systems of his day. Uppermost in his mind was the hypothesis that everything in the universe is good for something, which accounts for his cutting fungus from tombstones and collecting dew on glass plates at midnight. He was a true explorer of nature's arcanum. Many authorities have held the opinion that he was the discoverer of mesmerism, and that Mesmer evolved the art as the result of studying the writings of this great Swiss physician. The utter contempt which Paracelsus felt for the narrow systems of medicine in vogue during his lifetime, and his conviction of their inadequacy, are best expressed in his own quaint way, but the number of diseases that originate from some unknown causes is far greater than those that come from mechanical causes, and for such diseases our physicians know no cure, because not knowing such causes they cannot remove them. All they can prudently do is to observe the patient and make their guesses about his condition, and the patient may rest satisfied if the medicines administered to him do no serious harm, and do not prevent his recovery. The best of our popular physicians are the ones that do least harm. But, unfortunately, some poison their patients with mercury, others purge them or bleed them to death. There are some who have learned so much that their learning has driven out all their common sense, and there are others who care a great deal more for their own profit than for the health of their patients. A disease does not change its state to accommodate itself to the knowledge of the physician, but the physician should understand the causes of the disease. A physician should be a servant of nature, and not her enemy. He should be able to guide and direct her in her struggle for life and not throw, by his unreasonable interference, fresh obstacles in the way of recovery. From the Paragranum, translated by Franz Hartmann. The belief that nearly all diseases have their origin in the invisible nature of man, the astrum, is a fundamental precept of Hermetic medicine, for while Hermetists in no way disregarded the physical body, they believed that man's material constitution was an emanation from, or an objectification of, his invisible spiritual principles. A brief, but it is believed fairly comprehensive, resume of the Hermetic principles of Paracelsus follows. The title page of the Book of Alze from Museum Hermeticum Reformatum et Amplificatum. This title page is a further example of Hermetic and alchemical symbolism. The seven-pointed star of the sacred metals is arranged that one black point is downward, thus symbolizing Saturn, the destroyer. Beginning in the space immediately to the left of the black point, reading clockwise discloses the cryptic word vitriol formed by the capital letters of the 7 Latin words in the outer circle. P. 110 There is one vital substance in nature upon which all things subsist. It is called archeus, or vital life force, and is synonymous with the astral light or spiritual air of the ancients. In regard to this substance, Eliphas Levi has written, light, that creative agent, the vibrations of which are the movement and life of all things, light, latent in the universal ether, radiating about absorbing centers, which, being saturated thereby, project movement and life in their turn, so forming creative currents, light, astralized in the stars, animalized in animals, humanized in human beings, light, which vegetates all plants, glistens in metals, produces all forms of nature and equilibrates all by the laws of universal sympathy. This is the light which exhibits the phenomena of magnetism, divined by Paracelsus, which tinctures the blood, being released from the air as it is inhaled and discharged by the hermetic bellows of the lungs. The history of magic. This vital energy has its origin in the spiritual body of the earth. Every created thing has two bodies, one visible and substantial, the other invisible and transcendent. The latter consists of an ethereal counterpart of the physical form, it constitutes the vehicle of archeus, and may be called a vital body. This etheric shadow sheath is not dissipated by death, but remains until the physical form is entirely disintegrated. These etheric doubles, seen around graveyards, have given rise to a belief in ghosts. Being much finer in its substances than the earthly body, the etheric double is far more susceptible to impulses and inharmonies. It is derangements of this astral light body that cause much disease. Paracelsus taught that a person with a morbid mental attitude could poison his own etheric nature, and this infection, diverting the natural flow of vital life force, would later appear as a physical ailment. All plants and minerals have an invisible nature composed of this archeus, but each manifests it in a different way. Concerning the astral light bodies of flowers, James Gaff Barul, in 1650, wrote the following: I answer, that though they be chopped in pieces, brayed in a mortar, and even burned to ashes, yet do they nevertheless retain, by a certain secret, and wonderful power of nature, both in the juice, and in the ashes, the self-same for me, and figure, that they had before, and though it be not there visible, yet it may by art be drawn forth, and made visible to the eye, by an artist. This perhaps will seem a ridiculous story to those, who read only the titles of books, but, those that please, may see this truth confirmed, if they but have recourse to the works of M. Duchesne, S. de la Violette, one of the best chemists that our age hath produced, who affirms, that himself saw an excellent Pollock physician of Cracovia, who kept, in glasses, the ashes of almost all the herbs that are known, so that, when any one, out of curiosity, had a desire to see any of them, as, for example, a rose, in one of his glasses, he took that where the ashes of a rose were preserved, and holding it over a lighted candle, so soon as it ever began to feel the heat, you should presently see the ashes begin to move, which afterwards rising up, and dispersing themselves about the glass, you should immediately observe a kind of little dark cloud, which dividing itself into many parts, it came at length to represent a rose, but so fair, so fresh, and so perfect a one, that you would have thought it to have been as substantial, and as odoriferous a rose, as grows on the rose tree. Unheard of curiosities concerning talismanical sculpture of the Persians. Paracelsus, recognizing derangements of the etheric double as the most important cause of disease, sought to reharmonize its substances by bringing into contact with it other bodies whose vital energy could supply elements needed, or were strong enough to overcome the diseased conditions existing in the aura of the sufferer. Its invisible cause having been thus removed, the ailment speedily vanished. The vehicle for the archeus, or vital life force, Paracelsus called the mumia. A good example of a physical mumia is vaccine, which is the vehicle of a semi-astral virus. Anything which serves as a medium for the transmission of the archeus, whether it be organic or inorganic, truly physical or partly spiritualized, was termed a mumia. The most universal form of the mumia was ether, which modern science has accepted as a hypothetical substance serving as a medium between the realm of vital energy and that of organic and inorganic substance. The control of universal energy is virtually impossible, save through one of its vehicles, the mumia. A good example of this is food. Man does not secure nourishment from dead animal or plant organisms, but when he incorporates their structures into his own body he first gains control over the mumia, or etheric double, of the animal or plant. Having obtained this control, the human organism then diverts the flow of the archeus to its own uses. Paracelsus says, that which constitutes life is contained in the mumia, and by imparting the mumia we impart life. This is the secret of the remedial properties of talismans and amulets, for the mumia of the substances of which they are composed serves as a channel to connect the person wearing them with certain manifestations of the universal vital life force. According to Paracelsus, in the same way that plants purify the atmosphere by accepting into their constitutions the carbon dioxide exhaled by animals and humans, so may plants and animals accept disease elements transferred to them by human beings. These lower forms of life, having organisms and needs different from man, are often able to assimilate these substances without ill effect. At other times, the plant or animal dies, sacrificed in order that the more intelligent, and consequently more useful, creature may survive. Paracelsus discovered that in either case the patient was gradually relieved of his malady. When the lower life had either completely assimilated the foreign mumia from the patient, or had itself died and disintegrated as the result of its inability to do so, complete recovery resulted. Many years of investigation were necessary to determine which herb or animal most readily accepted the mumia of each of various diseases. Paracelsus discovered that in many cases plants revealed by their shape the particular organs of the human body which they served most effectively. The medical system of Paracelsus was based on the theory that by removing the diseased etheric mumia from the organism of the patient and causing it to be accepted into the nature of some distant and disinterested thing of comparatively little value, it was possible to divert from the patient the flow of the archeus which had been continually revitalizing and nourishing the malady. Its vehicle of expression being transplanted, the archeus necessarily accompanied its mumia, and the patient recovered. The Hermetic theory concerning the causations of disease. According to the Hermetic philosophers, there were 7 primary causes of disease. The first was evil spirits. These were regarded as creatures born of degenerate actions, subsisting on the vital energies of those to whom they attached themselves. The second cause was a derangement of the spiritual nature and the material nature. These two, failing to coordinate, produced Johannes Baptist von Helmont. From von Helmont's Ausgang der Arts und Kunst. At the beginning of the 17th century, von Helmont, the Belgian alchemist, to whom incidentally, the world is indebted for the common term gas, as distinguished from other kinds of air, while experimenting with the root of a, touched it to the tip of his tongue, without swallowing any of the substance. He himself describes the result in the following manner: immediately my head seemed tied tightly with a string, and soon after there happened to me a singular circumstance such as I had never before experienced. I observed with astonishment that I no longer felt and thought with the head, but with the region of the stomach, as if consciousness had now taken up its seat in the stomach. Terrified by this unusual phenomenon, I asked myself and inquired into myself carefully, but I only became the more convinced that my power of perception became greater and more comprehensive. This intellectual clearness was associated with great pleasure. I did not sleep, nor did I dream, I was perfectly sober, and my health was perfect. I had occasionally had ecstasies, but these had nothing in common with this condition of the stomach, in which it thought and felt, and almost excluded all cooperation of the head. In the meantime my friends were troubled with the fear that I might go mad. But my faith to God, and my submission to His will, soon dissipated this fear. This state continued for 2 hours, after which I had same dizziness. I afterwards frequently tasted of the A, but I never again could reproduce these sensations. Van Helmont, Doeman's Idea. Reprinted by P. Davidson in The Mistletoe and Its Philosophy. Von Helmont is only one of many who have accidentally hit upon the secrets of the early priestcrafts, but none in this age give evidence of an adequate comprehension of the ancient Hermetic secrets. From the description von Helmont gives, it is probable that the herb mentioned by him paralyzed temporarily the cerebrospinal nervous system, the result being that the consciousness was forced to function through the sympathetic nervous system and its brain, the solar plexus. P. 1111 Mental and physical subnormality. The third was an unhealthy or abnormal mental attitude. Melancholia, morbid emotions, excess of feeling, such as passions, lusts, greeds, and hates, affected the mumia, from which they reacted into the physical body, where they resulted in ulcers, tumors, cancers, fevers, and tuberculosis. The ancients viewed the disease germ as a unit of mumia which had been impregnated with the emanations from evil influences which it had contacted. In other words, germs were minute creatures born out of man's evil thoughts and actions. The fourth cause of disease was what the Orientals called karma, that is, the law of compensation, which demanded that the individual pay in full for the indiscretions and delinquencies of the past. A physician had to be very careful how he interfered with the workings of this law, lest he thwart the plan of eternal justice. The fifth cause was the motion and aspects of the heavenly bodies. The stars did not compel the sickness but rather impelled it. The Hermetists taught that a strong and wise man ruled his stars, but that a negative, weak person was ruled by them. These 5 causes of disease are all superphysical in nature. They must be estimated by inductive and deductive reasoning and a careful consideration of the life and temperament of the patient. The 6th cause of disease was a misuse of faculty, organ, or function, such as overstraining a member or overtaxing the nerves. The 7th cause was the presence in the system of foreign substances, impurities, or obstructions. Under this heading must be considered diet, air, sunlight, and the presence of foreign bodies. This list does not include accidental injuries, such do not belong under the heading of disease. Frequently they are methods by which the law of karma expresses itself. According to the Hermetists, disease could be prevented or successfully combated in 7 ways. First, by spells and invocations, in which the physician ordered the evil spirit causing the disease to depart from the patient. This procedure was probably based on the biblical account of the man possessed of devils whom Jesus healed by commanding the devils to leave the man and enter into a herd of swine. Sometimes the evil spirits entered a patient at the bidding of someone desiring to injure him. In these cases the physician commanded the spirits to return to the one who sent them. It is recorded that in some instances the evil spirits departed through the mouth in the form of clouds of smoke, sometimes from the nostrils as flames. It is even averred that the spirits might depart in the form of birds and insects. The second method of healing was by vibration. The inharmonies of the bodies were neutralized by chanting spells and intoning the sacred names or by playing upon musical instruments and singing. Sometimes articles of various colors were exposed to the sight of the sick, for the ancients recognized, at least in part, the principle of color therapeutics, now in the process of rediscovery. The third method was with the aid of talismans, charms, and amulets. The ancients believed that the planets controlled the functions of the human body and that by making charms out of different metals they could combat the malignant influences of the various stars. Thus, a person who is anemic lacks iron. Iron was believed to be under the control of Mars. Therefore, in order to bring the influence of Mars to the sufferer, around his neck was hung a talisman made of iron and bearing upon it certain secret instructions reputed to have the power of invoking the spirit of Mars. If there was too much iron in the system, the patient was subjected to the influence of a talisman composed of the metal corresponding to some planet having an antipathy to Mars. This influence would then offset the Mars energy and thus aid in restoring normality. The fourth method was by the aid of herbs and simples. While they used metal talismans, the majority of the ancient physicians did not approve of mineral medicine in any form for internal use. Herbs were their favorite remedies. Like the metals, each herb was assigned to one of the planets. Having diagnosed by the stars the sickness and its cause, the doctors then administered the herbal antidote. The fifth method of healing disease was by prayer. All ancient peoples believed in the compassionate intercession of the deity for the alleviation of human suffering. Paracelsus said that faith would cure all disease. Few persons, however, possess a sufficient degree of faith. The sixth method, which was prevention rather than cure, was regulation of the diet and daily habits of life. The individual, by avoiding the things which caused illness, remained well. The ancients believed that health was the normal state of man, disease was the result of man's disregard of the dictates of nature. The seventh method was practical medicine, consisting chiefly of bleeding, purging, and similar lines of treatment. These procedures, while useful in moderation, were dangerous in excess. Many a useful citizen has died 25 or 50 years before his time as the result of drastic purging or of having all the blood drained out of his body. Paracelsus used all 7 methods of treatment, and even his worst enemies admitted that he accomplished results almost miraculous in character. Near his old estate in Hohenheim, the dew falls very heavily at certain seasons of the year, and Paracelsus discovered that by gathering the dew under certain configurations of the planets he